studio on the Blue Forge campus.
Founded in 1989, Blue Forge Group is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to empowering authors, musicians, actors, and game designers who are marginalized due to race, age, gender, size, disability, or socioeconomics. My name is Jennifer DeMarco, and I have volunteered for Blue Forge Group since I was 16 years old. I work with all 4 Blue Forge divisions: Blue Forge Films, Blue Forge Press, Blue Forge Gaming, and Blue Forge Records, making films, books, games, and albums. But my main role here is as the Chief Financial Officer. But being a filmmaker, an author, a game designer, a musician, and a finance executive aren't the sum of who I am. I'm also a grateful American and a proud Washingtonian. I'm a boxer and a dog lover. I'm a granddaughter, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. And I'm also fascinated by how people connect. I was diagnosed with autism when I was about 10 years old, but I wasn't told about the diagnosis until I was in my late 40s. By that point, I had spent more than 20 years raising my son, who was diagnosed before he was 2. So I felt like I knew a lot about autism. I didn't. 6 Easy Conversations is part of my continuing education to learn more about autism and how it's experienced by different people. Because when someone says to me, "You don't seem autistic," I find myself answering, "You need to change what you think autism looks like." I asked 5 artisans that I work with to speak with 3 young men on the autism spectrum about a topic of their choosing. Each of the conversations were about 10 minutes long, and they were all filmed right here in the hot summer heat under the hot studio lights. Neighborhood dogs barked, stray cats wandered around the rural campus, phones chimed. Not all the conversations were easy, but all of them were worth it. Hi, Maxwell. My name is Jennifer. It's wonderful to talk with you today.
You too.
I wanted to talk with you about your opinions, your feelings about therapy, both like counseling type therapy, talk therapy, and also therapy that might involve, like a doctor saying, "Hey, I think maybe this antidepressant or something like that would be a good choice for you." What have your experiences been with therapy? And actually, I'll even start by saying I myself participated in talk therapy from the time I was 11 until the time I was 18, twice a week and then once a week, dealing with issues of being a survivor of rape, and also just dealing with issues of growing up an integrated busing system that took me out of the community that I was used to and shipped me to a community I was super not used to, things like that. A lot of class issues were coming into play where I felt very lost. So I am very pro talk therapy, even though, interestingly enough, years later as an adult, the advice and some of the building blocks that I was given by my therapist actually didn't age very well. She kind of directed me in a way that nowadays would be seen as not actually appropriate or needed, but rather that I would have had I'm just stumbling all over myself, more bodily autonomy is taught more now. So I think therapy is a really good thing, but I also know as an adult I had to come to terms with, wow, a lot of the stuff that I was told is just simply not the case. Yeah. So what has been your experience with therapy, and where do you stand about it?
Okay, so this is not an easy answer.
No, it's not an easy topic.
But I always try and give kind of a short summary of a story before I go into the too long version, as they say. I personally would be very pro therapy. I think that having someone to talk to, that you can talk to about things that, like a professional that you feel like you can really vent to, really talk to, and that they're going to hear you out, that they're supportive, and then they'll actually give you good advice on top of just being like that supportive ear. I think that is a incredibly valuable thing to be able to have access to, and it really did help me through my teenage years, which I look back at my teenage years, and I have said this before, and I want to commit this to film. If I had done, like, even any of the, like, projects that I had in mind when I was, like, 15, 14, 16, I would have looked back, I would have seen them today as a fairly well-adjusted adult who really knows where he wants to, like, take his creative spirit and, like, his passion projects. I would have puked.
Wow.
And I don't say that lightly. So that tells you what like, the headspace I was in at the time. I was in a very confused headspace. I was a teenager living on the autism spectrum, and I was still really figuring things out. And I had a lot of things that I had to go through. I had a lot of conflicting like emotions. I had a lot of issues that I was carrying over from my childhood, because growing up I had to deal with a lot of things. I had to deal with not the traditional form of bullying, but I had to deal with some people who didn't understand me. I had to deal with some people in my personal life who were not a good influence on me. And being able to talk to that therapist who was so supportive and really gave me a chance as someone on the autism spectrum who had a more unorthodox way of thinking about things, I cannot thank her enough. She helped me get through so much, and I truly think she helped me become a better person. But then she did help me find prescriptions that I think did help me balance out some of those things. And I personally I know some people get a little hesitant about like medication for depression or whatnot. But I personally, as someone who did live through pretty bad depression at times, and a lot of self-hatred, cannot recommend like that sort of medication enough, because it hasn't changed who I am. It's just gotten rid of those thoughts that let me actually express myself without having to fight this loathing. So personally speaking, I couldn't recommend therapy enough. But then we have the people like who you dealt with.
Go ahead.
And I know that, therapy changes with time. And, I had a modern therapist who really was informed and knew how to, deal with people of all types, like on the spectrum, off the spectrum. But
yes,
then you have but a good or bad therapist is so crucial. And what I must recommend is, if you do not click with a therapist, find another therapist, because that is so important. You need to have a person who you can open up to. Not everyone's gonna find that perfect therapist right on their first try. And I think you'll know if you really like someone and willing to open up to them or not.
Yeah.
Because I've heard so many times of people getting a therapist who doesn't know how to properly articulate things, or Because, like, being a therapist, it is not an easy job.
Yeah.
And, like, one wrong piece of advice or one biased viewpoint, it can really change your perception, and that's not a good thing.
Yes, 100% that.
Yeah, you need to find someone who's reasonable. You need to find someone who really views you as a human and wants to help you, not impose their view on you.
Yes.
And that is like in fiction. Like, I always appreciate, like, good representations of therapists, but there's always in like, fiction. I always go back to fiction because it really does influence our culture and reflects it in many ways.
Yes.
There's always that, like, one therapist who's always, like, telling them, like, the bad advice. Or, like, is always, like, just looking to, like, profit off them in some way.
A Hollywood trope of the corrupt therapist who, like, starts a relationship with the client or gives them purposeful advice to steer them in a direction that benefits the actual therapist.
Yeah.
Like, and that trope, I feel, is really a disservice because it puts a stigma on therapy. And I like what you just said. You saw a modern day therapist. You know, I'm talking about, I felt as a teenager the way you feel today about your therapist. I was like, without this therapist, I would not be surviving these years. And I still to this day give that therapist credit. But this was 25 years ago. And the therapist that I saw had a very strong feminist bent. And 25 years ago, that bent didn't quite mesh with, it meshed with the woman I needed to be hearing from in that moment to keep me on this planet. But as an adult woman, out in the world 25 years later, that advice simply didn't age well. But I'm like, well, what advice does age well after 25 years? Not much. So I really hear you. And I think the only thing that I really want to throw out there is you're absolutely right. If you don't feel safe with your therapist, or if you're like, ooh, that's really biased, that's an opinion, that's not textbook psychology there. So it's like you have to have a very strong sense of self. Because if your therapist doesn't mesh with you, but you're like, oh no, this is the only therapist my insurance covers. Most of the time, that's not going to be the case. It may mean that you need to go without therapy a little bit longer while you continue to search. But you can also turn to the same clinic that your therapist is at and just say, call them and just say, I'm really not meshing with this therapist. Do you guys have someone else that I can see? Or is there, maybe you have to drive a little bit farther or take another bus. But having that therapist that you mesh with, that you feel safe with, that instinctually you're like, your gut says, this person knows what they're talking about, this person gets me. It's really important to see a bit of yourself across the room in that other therapist. That doesn't mean you have to see a man or like I would have to see a gay lady or whatever it is. No, but there has to be something that you're like, this person gets where I'm coming from. So I agree with you. I too am very pro therapy, but I'm also very pro have strong self-worth. Which is hard. That's a lot of the reason why a lot of us go into therapy. But thank you for talking with me about this, Maxwell. Thank you for sharing your experience. That is fantastic. Hi, Daniel. My name is Jennifer, and I wanted to talk with you today about your opinion on therapy. Both talk therapy and, like therapy where someone is prescribed medication, that kind of thing. Have you ever attended therapy before?
Yeah, I've attended therapy a lot. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I was in therapy from the time I was 11 to the time I was 18, twice a week and then once a week. And I definitely feel like it really got me through those years really well. I was in therapy to just kind of deal with life in general, probably as someone who's on the spectrum dealing with life in general, even though that wasn't the main focus, because at that point it had not been revealed to me that I had autism. So, but also dealing with being a survivor of rape and dealing with some class issues, because I grew up in a really poor family, and right about when I was a preteen going into teenhood, Washington passed a law that set up this whole integrated busing system. So it bused a lot of the poor kids into wealthy neighborhoods so that we could supposedly attend better schools. But what really kind of happened was suddenly I was surrounded by peers that were not my peers. I didn't feel like I identified with these upper class kids, and it was really, really difficult to kind of mesh that. And I think therapy really helped me deal with some of those big issues. Do you feel comfortable talking about your experiences in therapy, what you liked, what you didn't like, stuff like that?
When you have the right therapist, I think it's really important and can help a lot.
Yeah. What do you think it makes up a good therapist?
Them understanding your issues and giving good suggestions.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I absolutely agree. There's a lot of stigma still about therapy. You know, people, oh, you go to therapy, you know. Did you feel, was there stigma when you were growing up about attending therapy?
Not really.
That's cool. I'm glad that is waning. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Did you, how old were you when you first attended therapy?
I think like 9 or 10, I don't know.
Yeah, so pretty young, before you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And do you still attend therapy today as an adult?
Yes, I do.
And do you feel is there a difference between attending therapy as a kiddo and attending as an adult? What are some of those differences, if there are some?
It's easier to explain your issues as an adult.
Oh, that's a very good point. Huh.
Yeah.
I remember when I was really, really young and first started therapy, some of the methods that the therapist used, you know, were obviously catered to a younger person. You know, I think they call it, you know, play therapy. You know, so we have like, you know, there's a dollhouse or there's animals and, you know, then everything is done that way. And then as I got older, therapy became more of like the tradition that we see. You know, I sat in a chair, they sat in a chair, I spoke, they gave advice, they listened back and forth. And I remember as a child, some of the play therapy, like I didn't get it. I was like, why are we, and I would stop and go, why are we doing this? You know, can we just like talk about how I got bullied today? Or can we just, and it would be like, well, maybe the zebra can talk to us about how you were bullied. And I'm like, I think I could just talk about it. It's okay. Did you ever experience play therapy when you were a kiddo, or was it all just talk therapy? Or
I think it was mainly just talk therapy.
yeah, I think I would have liked that a lot more. Do you think that therapy can be a valuable tool for all kinds of people, or what is your feeling in general?
Yeah, absolutely. It could value just about anyone.
Yeah. There's a huge prevalence, a rise in like online therapy and like therapy apps. I've heard there are even apps that it's actually not a therapist. It's like an AI that will supposedly help you with general questions and this kind of thing. What do you think of online therapy?
It's an interesting new idea that I'd be okay with trying out.
Yeah. With an online therapy session where like you're like a Zoom, you know, therapy session is one thing. Yeah, I think I would be willing to try that out too. That just seems like it's just another platform. What do you think of these like AI therapies? Have you ever read about those or heard about those, Daniel?
I haven't really heard of those.
Yeah, I only recently heard about them. And I just thought it seemed a little bit like there might be a little bit of a gray area there, a little bit of danger, because I was concerned with, you know, we're all not cookie cutters. You know, we're not, my problems aren't your problems. Even though, like, let's say we both worked at the same business and we were both getting really bullied by another adult employee who was just kind of being a jerk. But still, if you and I talked to a therapist about it, we would be talking to them in different ways. So I felt like the kind of AI therapy could very easily give people the wrong answers. So that made me a little nervous.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. When you think of, or when I think of therapy, I do definitely think of two distinct types of therapy. Talk therapy and therapy where a prescription is involved, like a psychiatrist who might say, okay, you know, I think maybe we should try Prozac, or we should try this, or we should try that. Do you have different feelings about the two different kinds of therapy?
I'd say some people definitely would need medication.
Yeah, yeah. Like for depression or any of those intrusive thoughts, really bad OCD, things like that. Yes. Yeah. In terms of talk therapy, what advice would you give someone who hasn't gone to therapy before about, and they're like nervous about their first session? Would you have any advice for somebody?
I'd say just introduce yourself and
Okay.
talk about what you want to talk about.
So be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a safe place. I mean, I think that's the one of the things that I keep circling back around to is, what do you do if you don't feel safe with your therapist, or if you're just like, I don't think this person gets me?
I'd say change a new one.
Yeah.
To a new one.
Yeah. I know a lot of folks are like, well, it's so hard to find a therapist. I'm like, yeah, it is hard, but
Yeah.
it's important. It's important to feel not only that you can speak openly, but that what they're saying makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Because why be there? Why spend the time if you're not getting any help from it?
Exactly.
Do you feel comfortable? Can you think of a one really good piece of advice that a therapist said, or a particular issue that you felt like a therapist really helped with?
I'm not completely sure, but like,
General life.
yeah, they've helped with general life stuff.
Yeah, see, I like that. Because I felt like people will often say, well, what was the specific issue that you were in therapy about, Jennifer? And I'm like, well, more than anything else, it was really general life. Kind of like trying to process my week. Like, this kind of stuff happened and not really sure how I feel about that kind of stuff. And a therapist kind of helped me talk through it and find kind of what worked and what didn't work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that I would definitely recommend therapy to folks. I don't think there is any negative. I don't think it's showing weakness. It's just showing the world is really big and really complicated. And sometimes I think we need advice more than just the advice we get from our own heads.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What do you think is the difference between like getting advice from a therapist and, I don't know, getting advice from your friends?
Sometimes one or the other could have better advice.
Actually, that's a really good point, that it's still valuable to ask advice of your friends, ask advice of your parents or family members or whatever. But it's nice to have that variety of advice.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I really like that. Thank you for talking with me, Daniel.
No problem.
Let's go. Awesome. Hi, Gregor. My name is Jennifer, and today I wanted to talk to you about your opinions on therapy. Mental health, medications, talk therapy, frequency of therapy, the stigma revolving around therapy. I attended therapy from the time I was 11 until the time I was 18, just kind of dealing with primarily issues of being a survivor of rape, but also mostly at the core dealing with the issues of integrated busing that right about when preteen became my teenage years, Washington changed the way it handled its public school system. So all of us poor kids were actually loaded onto school buses and bused an hour to an hour and a half to schools in wealthy neighborhoods. And I did not adjust well to being in this very different peer group. I really didn't roll with it. So therapy really, really helped in that way. What has been your experience with therapy? What are your opinions? Run with it.
All right. Well, the main thing that often has me with a soured opinion towards therapy is because my parents were very intent on making me go when I just didn't want to. I didn't understand why I was being, dragged out of the house every week towards, to the house of another person who we were paying more every week than we paid my guitar teacher a month, when I considered, the guitar teaching to be the more, valuable thing, and that I valued more, and yet still they were having to drag me, kicking and screaming out the door to something I just didn't want to do, and it was very annoying, and I was very ignored in my opinion of that I thought it was useless, and it kind of was. And then eventually, there were many medications that were prescribed. They kind of shifted around a bunch. Some of them I really did not vibe well with. Back when the diagnosis was believed to be bipolar, I was prescribed St. John's wort, and I actually really did not do well with it. I even was fully aware of it too. Like, guys, I think the St. John's wort is fucking with my head, and but it took several years before this opinion was listened to because parents really think they can do no wrong. And then. And eventually, and now the actual person that I was being dragged to, I don't blame them these days, but it pretty much did sour my ability to get to know them as a person because they were also, church friends with my parents, but to her credit, she was qualified to do the job. Uh-huh. She had the education and the license and all of that. That's how they knew each other, and of course, as a result, it was very hard for me to, be able to introduce myself to her after that was done, just because of the sheer dark cloud that was Mark and Suzanne dragging me over there when I just didn't want to. I didn't understand why they were doing it. Eventually, the diagnosis shifted to the much more appropriate one that was just depression, and then later modified to the high functioning depression because high functioning and all that just not really you don't really notice. And then later I discovered a different thing that was essentially depression squared. The major one that is essentially where it's a constant state of life that is the experience of depression punctuated by bouts of severe depression. And I'm like, what? Like, it makes sense, but that's a thing. So I guess that's what that is. And it was also the case that the medications were not working for me because I comprehended why they weren't working, and it actually made me feel even more miserable. A lot of the medications were essentially numbing agents that were meant to their credit, they probably work for other people. This didn't work for me because because on top of stifling my ability to even feel depressed, it was also stifling my ability to be creative. It was stifling everything, and I basically comprehended that, my creativeness was being knocked down a few pegs because of the medications, and that made me feel even worse because I put a lot of my self-worth into my creative endeavors and my ability to do so.
Yeah.
And eventually, I phased out of that completely, so I'm no longer on any prescribed medications. It's usually just over-the-counter vitamin supplements for what I can't get in my diet already. And also and therapy is just something that I've always really never wanted to go to because, I also am fully aware of how dangerous it is for a depressed person to go to therapy in America. There is this little thing that I very generously call compelled betrayal. However, it's just my little colloquialism for when, medical professionals are legally required to rat you out if they think you're going to harm yourself or others, which ends up contradicting the whole point. Like, that means that now suddenly you have made it very clear that I can't talk to you about these particular things, and I have to choose my words very, very carefully, or a misinterpretation or downright malinterpretation can lead to being locked up in the psych ward. And I've been to one of those mental hospitals, and there were people there who would literally have rather been in jail. They have you. The ones that they're worried about escaping, they have them wear orange, and they have them wear an orange just in case they do escape, so that way. I was not put in that. No, they let me wear my street clothes because I wasn't too much trouble. But it was also the case that the nurses are all ego tripping power maniacs. Several people had fits yelling that they would yelling, "Take me to jail instead. I don't want to be here. I'd rather be in jail." And they also would take their laces off of your shoes, and you'd have to surrender your belts. First off, if you really can choke yourself out with your own shoelaces at that point, that's so clever. Let them. Come on, guys. But it was very much the nurses were ego tripping bastards, and I did get into an altercation with them at one point. And what was also very frustrating about that was that my mother, the doctor, was basically siding with the nurses. You'd think that she would be aware that nursing is the number one career choice for grade school bullies, followed by law enforcement.
Yeah.
Not a coincidence, by the way. But either way, the reason why I refuse to this day to go to therapy is because I am very aware of how dangerous it would be for me to do so, because I would then have to be very specific about my word choices, more so than I already am in general. That basically means that if this therapist misinterprets, that would be incredibly dangerous for me, and it's not hard to misinterpret some of the stuff I say. The jokes that I make and some of the more dark comedy humor or even British humor, right, in the form of casually being like, I shall crush them and throw them into the mountainside, like people don't get that.
Yeah. Okay, so now then I have to kind of put you in the hot seat for a minute then, because I do love this kind of line. If someone is struggling and they're like, I don't know who to talk to, I don't know how to figure this out, my head is abuzz, whatever it is, what do you do for your own mental health? Like, do you meditate? Do you box? Do you run? What do you do to kind of keep your head on straight?
Usually I'm just pacing around and having my feet moving. I'll maybe even I'll grab my axe and train with it for a little bit.
Yeah. Physical activity.
And then I'll condition my knuckles a bit on one of those trees that you saw with a bit of its bark stripped.
Yeah.
Or I have actually a folder of music that is the file names. I have great file naming conventions. First off, when it comes to my music, where there's this music where it's like music that plays right when your nemesis thinks they've defeated you, music for preparing to fight to the traitors, music for fighting a one-man rebellion against fascist occupation.
Oh yeah, soundtrack for your life. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I like it.
My music tastes aren't that specific. Also, my music tastes, but yes. And when all else fails, just counting the seconds, even. I've even mentioned this line in several of the stories I've written, including one that I just did an editing pass over, where it's literally just counting the seconds, because every second that you're counting is one that you've earned in spite of your foe's efforts.
Yes, absolutely.
I think there's a lot of validity also in the school of thought of, if depression really wanted me dead, it would just kill me himself. So that famous line where depression's like, kill yourself, like, kill me yourself, coward. So that sort of attitude is a little bit more helpful, but it is always very annoying, the fact that, I'm very aware of how I really shouldn't go to a therapist, because, with one exception, all the ones that I've met, have been like that. They've been medical professionals who are, at any moment about ready to hit that button.
Yeah, no, it clearly does not work for you.
Yeah,
it's not a place where you feel safe and
quite
supported.
The opposite,
right? Yeah,
no. I got to be even more vigilant around people who could just say, in my professional medical opinion, lock him up, and then they'll do it without a second thought.
Yeah. I've talked about with other folks, like, if a therapist isn't a good match for you, keep looking. It's okay to leave. But I think that's also a really important thing to state, is that if therapy isn't for you, it's okay to say, this is not for me.
Yeah.
This does not feel safe. This does not feel supportive. I do not feel like I am moving forward as a human being because of this. So I think that's very valid. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I am speaking to Maxwell today. Great to see you here, Maxwell.
You too.
I affectionately call Maxwell Max, because I've been knowing Max for a long time, since he was a young teenager. To see you grow up into a nice, scrapping young man, it's good to see you, man. It's great to be able to have this conversation with you about race. Just to sum up, racism in this country has been something that has become more than a headache. It has become something that is plastered across national news. We have subject matter with the Proud Boys. We have Black Lives Matter. We have all of these things on our TV and on our cell phones and every type of device that you can use on a daily basis. So it has become something that should have been silented, I believe, and something that we should have not solved, but at least had a good handle on, especially because of the history of racism. It has become something that is even more explosive nowadays than it's ever been.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about the tough subject of racism. The first thing I want to know is, tell me what your opinion of racism is and your experience here.
Personally, it is certainly a very, like you said, explosive subject, but I think it's one that I would hope can yield a lot of complicated answers, but I think should only have one simple answer to start with, and that is that personally, I do not believe in racism at all, and that's not to say I don't believe it exists. I mean that you should not judge people based on the color of their skin, their sexuality, their gender, their age, anything. I believe that everyone should be judged literally on their own merits as a person, and I think that racism is founded on a lot of stereotypes, many of which are completely unfounded.
Exactly.
So
I love the way you said that as far as stereotypes and that they are unfounded. And you would think in the age of technology that we would have a much better grasp on these stereotypes, right? These stereotypes, when they first came out, there's because we didn't know each other. We didn't know about each other's backgrounds. We didn't know about each other's cultures. We didn't know about the history of each other. But like, again, with the age of technology, we know a lot more about our backgrounds. We know a lot more about history. History is at our fingertips. If we have a question about it, we can literally go to our phone, speak it into our phone, and we'll get that information. Even stereotypes of, or black people are like this, or white people are like that, and all those things. Those walls have been broken down, and yet we still have this, So, my question is, what do we do about it? Not what is the complete answer, but at least how do we start? Where do we start from?
Well, I think that is a very difficult question, and there's been a lot of measures to try and solve it that you think would go over well, but has received backlash from people who have these ideas so ingrained in, I suppose, their culture, or like have been passed down like from their parents and whatnot, or just like they're so inclined to they don't want to admit they're wrong.
That's right.
Then I think it's difficult, but I think the smaller things do really make the most difference, and kind of like
That's a great point.
normalizing it in a way that kind of like doesn't like, it is so hard to find the right words, but in that like ways that normalize it without being, I hate to say this in regards to racial equality, but intrusive, I suppose, because like so often, like you were talking about online, you'll see these people being like, oh, they're shoving this down our throats. Like, it has to be racial equality, and I speak this especially in regards to media, because I will fully admit, I am not too well versed on movements in real life. But when it comes to media, I've found that, for instance, writing a really good like character of color, or a character of like a transgender character, or something like that, and just naturally integrating it into the story, and never saying, oh, this character is Asian, this character is gay, like just like
It's
having it be a thing.
Yeah, it's the character. Just like if John Wayne is in a movie, it's like he's not a white cowboy, he's a cowboy in a movie. That's it. And that's where he belongs, because he's in the movie.
And letting those characters be judged on their own merits, as in not having, oh, this character is black, this character is a lesbian, not having that be their defining trait.
That's right. They don't want to be defined.
Yeah, exactly.
They just want to be included, just like anyone else.
That, I think, is a huge step in the right direction, and it's something that I really hope that I'm able to include in many of the stories that I want to do personally. And I think with that, especially since media, it does affect how people like see the real world. I think that's a big step towards, still hate to say this word, but I guess normalizing, for lack of a better term. I don't like using that word. Is there like a better term?
You
for
know
that?
what? Let me piggyback off of what you were saying. I think you were going down a really good road, and I'm gonna pivot. And I had a question I was gonna answer, and I'm gonna ask this instead.
Okay.
You said the media, because I think the media has a lot to do with bringing temperance and bringing equality and helping, because they're actually showcasing what's going on in our country. And at the same time, on the flip side of that, I believe that they have been a lot of the catalyst of perpetuating stereotypes, or putting snippets in there to help divide us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you think the responsibility of the media should be, like in regards to racism?
In regards to racism, I think the clear answer is that newscasters should, and just media coverage, should try and look at things at the most unbiased angle they can, and again, view people based not on, stereotypes or what have you, but like actual merit of, okay, this is what happened, this is what's actually going on. And I think that more, again, I'm not too well versed in this, but
I
just like speaking as an outsider, I think that more like a in-depth journalism and informed journalism would help tremendously right now.
Instead of using it as clickbait.
Exactly. Yeah. But then that leads us to the inherent issue is the term sensationalism. They sensationalize things. Yeah.
Like that.
And news outlets right now, especially like, let's compare let's CNN to Fox News, just off the top of my head.
Yep.
Like, they are catering to their audience.
That's right.
And they are changing the narrative. Like,
Instead of catering to the truth.
Yeah, I once, one of our artisans once brought up an interesting point. They said that their parents would sometimes have them, they would sit them down when there was like a significant news story and be like, okay, let's look at how CNN's covering this, and then let's look at Fox News, and like compare how the two like convey a narrative. And it is, I think right now it is, I think we need to, as a society, we need to move past this like this era of like pandering and like clickbait and try and find the genuine, like, we need to find an unbiased narrative, basically.
I'll give you an opinion of mine. It just seems that they're two wings of the same bird. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean?
I think so.
And as long as they can keep us divided, then we won't be united and see what the true problem is. The true problem is not so much media. And I think that they're the ones that are just recording everything, But the true problem are people who are in power, that we think that, okay, if we vote for this person, they're going to serve our interest. While people on the left or right, respectively, they say if we vote for this person, they're going to serve our interest, without understanding that both of those two people know each other.
Yeah.
They go to vacations together. Their children know each other. Their children are raised together. But in public, and when it's on film, they act like they're two separate entities that serves this purpose and this purpose for these people and these people, but they don't. And the whole time they keep us separated, and not able to have that dialogue. And we always go back to shaking the finger thing. Well, what if you guys did this? And what if you guys did that?
What if you
and stop doing this, and you guys stop doing that, and we'll stop doing this, and before you know it, we're like 7-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Right? And we're adults now, but we're still having these, elementary conversations, which is, racism, it's an old idea. That's all I'm saying. But no, it was great interviewing you, and I just have one final question. Personal responsibility. Because I know everybody has their unique individual personal responsibility to understand what racism is, have respect for their fellow man, have the patience and wherewithal to understand that everybody isn't on the same level as them. Some people are up here when it comes to racism. Some people are just down here, and that's just where they're going to stay. Personal responsibility to you, how do you define that?
I would say that in this day and age, I think it is important to keep in mind the general, what different cultures are going through, and just keep in mind I think just in general try and have common sense. Like, I don't think, like, censor what you say, but I think it's important to just keep in mind general courtesy and... These are all very general terms, I suppose,
That's
but
a great,
I mean,
no, that's
I
a
think
great,
it all
that's a great
depends.
way to say it, man. I like that. General courtesy is like something I haven't heard, and that's something that's probably it needs to be plastered on everywhere. General courtesy, man. That's great. You know what? I know we run out of time, but I just want to just tell you that I love your answers. I love being able to interview you. You're very eloquent in the way you spoke and how you know, very thought provoking. And I hope people hear this and they understand that, you know, the way that you described how we should act and behave in society is something that we at least need to start honing in on more, man. It was great talking to you, Max.
You too.
All right. Hello, my name is Carl Covington. I am interviewing Daniel today. Nice to meet you, Daniel.
You too.
Pleasure to meet you. And we are here to talk about a difficult conversation, which is the conversation about race. My opinion is it has become something that has become a disdain on our society, obviously, and it's been brought to the forefront here as of lately in the last, I would say, in the last 7 to 10 years. It has become more rampant than it had been in years prior, maybe even as rampant as it was in like the 50s and 60s, you know. In the age of technology, you would think that we would be past it and it would be more of an old idea, but here we are still dealing with it in the age of technology. So, Daniel, I guess my first question to you would be, what is your opinions about, you know, race relationships or race in general, and we can go from there.
Well, I think that like a lot of racism is systematic from the government, and that's been a huge problem. And sometimes I get scared about my friends that are in danger due to that systematic racism.
Now, you know what? It's a great word that you use, systematic, because I use that word as well. You know, and if you don't mind, if you feel comfortable about maybe talking about maybe systematic racism and how you view it, how do you see systematic racism in our country? How is it being instituted in our country?
I think both politicians and the police have huge issues with racism at this time. Well, I think they always have, but like it's been specifically prevalent this decade and the last.
Oh, that's exactly how I feel. Now, maybe I can ask you, Daniel, why do you think it's like that? Even in the time that we are now, that we should be so much further up the road, right? Why aren't we? Why do you think that it's more of a systematic thing now than, you know, in previous years?
I think it's mainly because of like politicians encouraging those views, as well as like there's a lot of websites out there, and well, just basically a lot of people in power that believe that kind of thing.
You know what? I believe what you're trying to say is that even though it may not have been, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't want to speak for you, right? But maybe the reason why it's a little more prevalent now is because we are in the age of information, and you can get that racist information to a lot more people than you could before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas like a lot of people, they were just raised with that. You know, if you're from a certain area or genre or, you know, general area, you were raised with that because your parents were like that here and whatever. Whereas other people weren't. But they still may have had a problem with people's race, you know. And now, the age of information, they're able to get that information, you know what I mean? And they're able to get with groups of people like them to where, who is more like them, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And before you wasn't able to do that. And now you are. Now you're able to find much more people like yourself, regardless of what that is. You know, not just racist, but anything. If you like, you know, skateboarding, there's tons of websites for that. You know, I mean, there's tons of, you know, websites for anything that you might be into, whether it's anime or whatever. And that also goes with, you know, the age of information. And if you don't mind me, so what would be maybe your opinion on how we can combat that? How can we combat that idea of racism here? Like what are things that maybe we could do?
I personally believe that defunding the police would help with that, because a lot of hate crimes come from the police.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've actually discussed that on a podcast that I've been involved in myself about defunding the police. Now, I will say this, if you don't mind me asking you, is that okay?
Yeah.
If we defund the police, because there's a growing number of people that said, well, if we defund the police, won't that take more police off the street, and will that jeopardize safety?
Personally, I believe that one of the ways we can help protect ourselves even without police help is to arm some people, not with like, not always with guns, but like with any weapon to defend themselves.
Makes sense. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, like, I think there are more people that need ways to protect themselves, especially people who could be victims of a hate crime.
Uh-huh. And yeah, I agree with you there. You know, I believe in, you know, there's some things I'm conservative on, there's some things I'm liberal on. So I'm not just total one side or the other.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just that they're two wings of the same bird sometimes, you know. So I try to look at things like I'm conservative about, you know, like, you know, certain subjects. And like I said, I'm liberal about like marriage and like who you are or whatever, right? But I'm conservative about gun laws. Yeah, I believe that we should have gun rights, but we shouldn't just be able to stockpile weapons, you know what I mean? I don't think we need to stockpile weapons, you know? Like if you need an AR, you know, and you need like 30, 40 guns, then you got more problems than somebody just trying to come to your house and rob you, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I appreciate you being honest, and I appreciate you being open about it. Obviously, it's a tough subject. I believe, you know, as far as defunding the police, if you don't mind me telling you what I believe about it, maybe not defunding the police, but definitely pivoting and diverting those funds. You see what I mean? Yeah. So I think a lot of people, when they think of defunding the police, they're like, well, they have too much weaponry and they have too much, you know, like, you know, armored cars and this stuff. You don't need all that. You know, you don't need full SWAT gear and, you know, rioting like you're going to Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
Because that kind of makes them aggressive. You know what I mean? If you come into a neighborhood with that stuff, it forces whoever is using that to feel like they have to use it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To where, and so maybe defunding the police means defunding that, you know, defunding the military mindset of the police and pivoting those funds into, like, I don't know, education, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe educating those people who are going into those neighborhoods. Not sure if you know or not, but it takes you longer to get a barber's license than it takes you to become a police officer. So you have to wait longer to be able to cut my hair than you would to be able to carry a weapon and protect my life, and protect your life, you know. So maybe we can put those energies and put those resources back into understanding who you're protecting, instead of you never come from my neighborhood, like a police officer never comes from your neighborhood, right? He never comes to your neighborhood. The only thing he ever sees from you is what is on TV, you know? And he has this certain preconceived notion, maybe even of me, because I'm a tall, strong-looking black dude. He doesn't know me. doesn't know I'm educated, doesn't know I went to college. He just sees me, right? And whatever he's seen on TV feeds into his whatever ism, racism, whatever, right? And so, but if he was more educated, that hey man, every person that you see is not aggressive. Some of it is just the way they dress, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: there's certain kids that are in white neighborhoods, right? They dress like emo style or rocker style or this or that. Some of that is synonymous with what? Drug use, right? Because that's what stereotypes we see it as, you know, like black people or people of color. And that's just not the case. Sometimes that's just the way they dress, man. It's just the way they like dress because that's their dress code. Some of them don't. They're straight A students, right? But without knowing, we're feeding into that stereotype. I believe if and my question was, I'm sorry, do you believe that may be a better way of use of funds if we do defund, you know, to take the funds and divert them?
I would say so, as well as like firing and arresting the corrupt police officers.
That's what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? We can agree on that, brother. I mean that. It seems it starts from the top down. It seems like the top down is corrupt, and it makes it easier. You know, it's like when you got bad parents, then you're gonna have bad kids. You know, a lot of the times. But you clean it up from the top down, man. You know, you make them accountable, and then everybody else has to be accountable, right? To in closing, and thank you, man. Thank you for interviewing, and thank you for being honest.
No problem.
And in closing, is there anything you would like to end with?
Well, like
What is your personal view? Is what I guess I should ask.
my personal view is that like it needs to end, and there needs to be like something done to stop it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And you know what? I appreciate your time, Daniel. Thank you for answering hard questions. I know that's a really, really hard one, man. Right? It's just like saying, how do we fix the economy?
Yeah.
Maybe even harder. Hello, Gregor.
Hi.
My name's Carl Covington, and I wanted to talk to you today about the subject of racism. I know it is a tough subject. I'll tell you my opinions on it before we start the interview. It seems that racism in America has become even more heightened, to say the least, in the year 2022. It seems that it has been more predicated in our society amongst everybody. It's something that has been taught before you go to elementary school and things like that. We see more of it being rampant in our society. Even in a progressive society, you think that we would be much further ahead than what we are. And it seems that we're taking a step back in anything. So today I just wanted to ask you, what is your opinion as a young gentleman with autism and on the spectrum, respectively? And I wanted to see what you think about this subject.
Well, going on your point that, we seem to be taking some steps back, I mean, you're right. The civic tensions are higher than they've been in a very long time. And also somewhat behind the scenes, there is kind of this thing going on with just a lot of people in America that there's this collective realization that a lot of things are so much more rooted in racism than anybody had anticipated. And there's basically three reactions to this that people have. Response one is they become defensive of the practices that they may not have known were rooted in racism before, but because they didn't know that and because they never saw it as a racism thing, they entrench and double down on the validity of that practice regardless of whether or not it remains so. Response two is basically grumbling off and being like, well, there goes another one. While response three, which I think is the least correct one, is essentially the non-response response of very shoddily attempting to make amends over it through displays of word of word rather than pragmatic action. And it's I never thought I didn't come up with a proper name for it, but the ones where where people are to put it bluntly, where white people are putting themselves in chains and saying sorry. Like, come on, guys, you're not doing anything. Are you that determined to reinvent Catholicism? As long as we feel bad about it, doesn't count. No, it doesn't. So that's the kind of the annoying response that is like, congratulations, you have accomplished nothing, but wasted your sweat on a display that doesn't help.
Well, you know what? I've studied this subject for years and years and mulled over it. And one thing that I've seen that today, this is the age of technology. So I think that racism has been around from its inception, and it has not waned. Like, it never went anywhere. But the thing about it is, it wasn't on camera. It wasn't able to be exposed as much as it is nowadays. I talked to a friend of mine, and we had a discussion, and I told him that, hey, people are still the same way they were in the 1600s. We don't have better people, we have better stuff. We have better cars, we have better phones, we have better technology, we have better ways of capturing people in their natural ways of living, in their natural habitat, and most importantly, their natural way of thinking. Because a lot of people, just like us, we're talking right here on camera. If this was to happen 10 or 15 years ago, we'd just be having a discussion, to where I think racism is being caught more, Not that it hasn't been there more, it's just being caught more.
I think you're right. People haven't changed much at all since Hadrian's Wall was built. There's literally penis graffiti on Hadrian's Wall. So humanity hasn't changed a bit. But it is the case there are more humans around, so that the number of instances can get higher and higher. It is also the case that mass communications have enabled, and mass amounts of cameras have enabled so much more information to be processed at once. There's more, there's more stuff happening in one day today than there was 10 or 15 years ago, if not only just because there's so much more people on the planet now. So I think you're totally right about that. There hasn't been much change in people. There has been an uptick in the ability for everything to be observed and noticed. So now a lot more people are having to think about this and are having to have these discussions than ever before. And naturally, it is going to cause tensions to ramp up and up and up. But, the alternative is the capital dishonor of willful ignorance. I know well enough of myself to know, I've thrown hands with racists and homophobes before, and I will absolutely do it again. So I come to terms. I know that's a bit of a strong word to be using, but I know I've come to terms with the fact that it is more observed, more observable, more noticeable. What I resolve to do is, what do I do when I'm there?
Exactly.
And that's what I'm allowing to determine, how history will remember me.
I want to segue into what you just said about what you do and, how you throw hands with racism and homophobes, because it seems that this is the way we deal with it, right? We get frustrated, like two parties get frustrated, right? Like racist people, they get frustrated and they say something racist, right? And then people who aren't racist, they respond to that. And usually it's something that it's, it goes and it's like a powder keg, right? And just my own, thoughts on it, I was like, it seems like nothing is being done. It just seems like it keeps being predicated. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I say, hey man, I have a problem with you being racist, and then someone says, hey, I have a problem with black people or this or that, there's a dialogue that can happen. But then once we start degrading each other, like F you because you're racist, or to hell with you if black people stop doing this, and blah 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 blah, right? Once we get into that conversation, then it becomes something that we can't come back from. It seems to where we go is where we have to use the hands, or we have to get violent, or we stop talking about the subject totally and we disconnect from it, and all we go is to the lower man, which is just to argue and it's just to fight. My question to you would be, what are ways that we can alleviate that? What are ways that we can come away or sit at the table and actually have a civilized conversation. Because you would think now, especially as far as we've come as a society, that we can have more of a civilized conversation about this, instead of having to go to hands.
Right. You are correct. There is absolutely a place for the, sit down at the table and talk about it. There was, that monologue in the Doctor Who episode where Peter Capaldi was saying, and no matter how righteous you feel when you fire that first shot, you don't know how many lives will be ruined.
Sure.
And then eventually everyone's going to get so tired, they'll do what they should have done from the start, sit down and talk about it.
It's a great analogy.
Yes. And I think, there's absolutely a place for diplomacy, and it should be and if offered, that route should totally be taken. It is the preferable route. But what do we do when that is not available? When it becomes so clear that, whoever I'm talking to has made up their mind, has decided that this is the way they're going to be, and and I know in my heart of heart and my mind of minds that if I leave this person to their own devices, they will continue to hurt others.
Yeah.
Because that is their doctrine. Their doctrine is to hurt others.
So that's and again I want to segue into that too. That I think you made some really great points. And what I hope to get to a point is to where I don't think that we can I don't want to say scrap all the humans right now because there's no saving them.
Right.
But at the same time, sometimes there's no talking to them, and unless you can talk to them, that's the only way we can even create diplomacy. And I'm not saying I think, but I'm saying maybe we haven't tried it enough. We do sing "We Are the World" and "Kumbaya" with the children, and let them know that we should have more tolerance and patience and understanding for each other. But we really don't give them the education that they truly need. We just tell them, hey, treat people accordingly, or treat people equally, or have this or have that. But we don't really tell them why. Why should we do this? Why are we doing this? Why is racism bad? We just say racism is bad or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do agree that is, a gap that is happening. And also, we're not even explaining how.
Yeah,
there's a why and a how question that aren't being answered, and that's a factor there. We're telling people, do this or don't do this. Okay, how? Just tell me how, and I'll be happy to do it.
Or how am I supposed to do it when this is what I'm being taught at home?
Yeah,
or how am I supposed to? There's a lot of people that I've heard to where they're not racist, but they're telling me, oh, my father used to be so racist, or my grandfather used to be so racist, so I was raised around it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You see a lot of people like that.
Yeah, and that I think is its own case. There's a difference between someone who has grown up around racist people and has, and as a result has that little disconnect and needs some help. There's a difference between that person and the person who has truly bought into it and believe that it's the right way to act.
Right.
And I'm very, the dialogue, I am more than happy to open up with the former of those two sides. Let's both admit you were raised wrong.
Yeah.
And then let's see what we can do from there. That is an idea that I do like.
A lot of it is accepting, and rejecting. A lot of it is acceptance that, what, I was taught this, or I was seeing this, or this is what I heard, and I accept the fact that this is my reality, but I reject it. I reject the idea of it.
Yes.
I reject the idea of being that type of person, of letting myself or me individually go down that road of seeing people as different than me, especially for the color of their skin, or for their nationality, or where they're where they come from. No one, it was no one's fault. Like, it wasn't my fault that I was born this nationality, or you were born this nationality. But it seems like that's how society wants to treat us. Like, we chose this instead of it being predicated on us. This is just how we were born. This is just who we are.
It was good talking to you about
Pleasure
this.
talking to you today, man.
It's something that nobody likes to talk about, but it does need to be talked about, I think.
Yeah, the hard things are always the most important things to talk about civilly.
Yes.
That's the most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
You're a great guy, man. It's great talking to you.
Hi, Maxwell. Mark here. How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
I guess we're going to be talking a little bit about the idea of autism and a military career.
Okay.
And I've been doing a little bit of research on this because some of you gentlemen would express some desire on it.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, what seems to be going on is all of the individual military services are wrestling with this whole thing because, of course, the whole idea of disabilities in the service.
Mm-hmm.
People that are losing arms and legs are now going back on active duty and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so somebody brought that up. And because of that, you have, like I said, each of the services wrestling with this as to trying to determine if that is going, if somebody comes out and says that, oh yeah, I have a diagnosis of on the autism spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
will I be allowed to get in? And so I was kind of wondering what your kind of feedback on that is, if you'd ever considered going into the military.
Well, I have not personally considered going into the military, but I have so much respect for our military forces and our soldiers. So I actually would say I do have an opinion on that. I would say that I think with autism, because like you said, it is a spectrum. It is, you can be completely nonverbal. You could be nonverbal, but totally aware of your surroundings. You could be a little bit more awkward, but pretty much normal. But I think when it comes to military service, it's one, I think it's a case-by-case basis, and two, I think it depends on the position. I think what they should probably be taking into account is pretty much what they do with any other condition, anything really. I think what they need to consider is where this person falls off a spectrum. Will they still be able to competently do their job, and will in this case their autism be a boon or a hindrance? Which I think depends on what position they're put in.
That brings up some cases that I was looking at, and there was one case in particular. An individual was a captain in the Air Force, and all of a sudden, he'd been on active duty for a while, and all of a sudden, some higher up decided that his autism was beginning to interfere with his job performance, and he couldn't understand it because, he didn't think there was anything, and that brought up the point of the fact that in some cases, the autistic tendency of being extremely focused on something can be a boon because you can notice glitches or mistakes or something somebody else wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that I actually think that having autism, like someone like me who is like very analytical, I think it could actually be a huge boon in the right situations. Like seeing things from every angle, seeing all the nuances, the glitches, like you said. I think that would be very crucial. I think that would be very important. But I think it's hard with like people who have been in active duty and then they just decided, oh no, it's being a hindrance, because it's so hard to like trace stuff back to autism, as people say, higher functioning people on the spectrum, because it's hard to say what's someone. Just a personal thing, and what's something that has to do with their condition. And I think I need to know more like context of that particular case to say whether or not it was justified. But yeah, that is hard for me to hear.
this was used as an example of the quote unquote case by case basis they're claiming to do, and that, like you said, each of the military services are looking at where they would fit in, and probably plus the whole idea of the quote unquote, like you mentioned, the socialization pressures.
Yes.
Boot camp is not a fun thing.
No.
It's not a fun thing for somebody who doesn't have it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a fun thing because of that.
Yeah,
The forced cohesiveness, the forced socialization, the forced everybody's a member of this one group. We all got to act basically the same. At the same time, they say we're going to be individual and use your brain, but at the same time, within a certain box.
You got to act with your comrades. You got to act with your troops. And I think that would be a I think that would be a hindrance, not even like a threat to like your position, but I think for just speaking as someone with autism, I think if I wanted to go into the military, that would be a hindrance that I'd have to take into consideration because yeah, there is that social aspect, and I think again like people with autism who would like to enlist should really like think about that and like think, okay, am I gonna be able to, is not like one, am I gonna be able to get through this, and two, am I going to be able to then act on what I'm told, which I think, and I think that is the most important thing because like because like on one hand I want to say yes, I think autistic people should absolutely be able to join the military, but at the same time it's like I want to be real, and I don't want to say everyone should join, even if they might be a liability. Yeah. You know, maybe that's a sign that you can enlist, but find somewhere where where you fall on the spectrum will be.
Speaking from the voice of experience, there's a lot of people that had nothing to do with autism that just couldn't hack it in the military for whatever reason. You know, just it happens.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so there's that, and I think as the more that people learn about autism and things like that, I think that's what they're trying to deal with. Is we used to lump a lot of quote unquote conditions in under just one category.
Yes.
You know,
yeah,
and
exactly. I
would probably say it's only been about the last 30 or 40 years that people actually started really studying autism.
Yes.
From the aspect of it being separate from any other, you know, quote unquote psychological problems that they would just all lump together, you know, and say, oh, that's a psychological problem. You know, we're going to deal with all of them the same. Not really realizing that not only there's a spectrum of autism, but there's a spectrum of psychological issues.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Which I am really glad that people are becoming more informed about. Like, that's made me very happy. Like, even, like, autism aside, but I mean, especially autism, though, but, like, I'm just very happy to know that. But, yeah, I think in general, if you want to enlist, then take into account what you can handle and try and find a position that you know you will excel in. But, yeah.
If somebody offered you a job in doing some type of film work in the military, would you take it?
You know, I think I actually would, because, yeah, I think I'd like to support the troops that way. That would actually be, actually, I think that would be an honor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was good talking to you today.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. Daniel?
Hello.
Mark, how are you doing today?
Good.
Good. We're going to have a little discussion here today about something that's come up recently, especially when it has to do with people re-examining disabilities and things like that. And that has to do with the idea of autism and joining the military. And so I've been doing a little bit of research on this, and it seems like all the military services are kind of wrestling with this idea of, you know, which individuals who have been diagnosed with some place on the spectrum of autism, would they fit into the military or not?
I think some people, whether they have a diagnosis or not, can fit in the military, but admittedly I'm pretty strongly anti-war. I haven't really supported any of the wars that have happened since like World War II.
So you wouldn't ever consider even doing any type of career job related to the military, or going in there for any training or anything like that?
Yeah, admittedly I'm against what they've been doing like after World War II.
Okay. Do you think if somebody would want to join the military, like let's say they wanted to get to specialized training in some career field, like whether it be maybe they wanted to become a jet mechanic and they're going to go in the Air Force or something like that, or there was some other type of technical skill and they wanted to go in the military, do you think that a diagnosis of any type of autism or Asperger's would be a barrier to that?
I don't think so. There's some people I know that struggle with it, but like some people I think they could use it for their benefit.
Okay, so you think for some people it might actually would help, or they might actually get something out of going in and doing the training and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. If you didn't have the moral idea of being completely anti-war, would you, like I said before, would you even consider the technical training side of it if they could actually give you some of the training, or do you just basically think that would support the war making?
I admittedly think it would support the war making. Personally, I wouldn't want anything to do with it myself.
Okay. But at the same time, if somebody, one of your friends, wanted to do it, then that would be their decision.
Yeah, of course. Even though like I'm personally against the military, I still think like all the bans are really wrong. Like there was an anti-LGBTQ ban.
Yeah. When I joined the military, there was still a pretty blanket ban against homosexual activity. Because I joined at the very end of the Vietnam War. The odd thing was, I was in the Air Force. The odd thing was, in the late 70s, it was kind of like people were purposely looking the other way. They didn't want to deal with it. They dealt with it in basic training and stuff like that. But past that, once you got to a base, it was like people just kind of said, okay, fine, as long as you're not blatant, we don't care, even though it's against regulations. Especially that involved women being lesbians and stuff. There was a lot of women that people knew were lesbians, but nobody said anything because it wasn't that big a deal. And then eventually, of course, when Clinton became president, then eventually they did the don't ask, don't tell thing. So I guess the only reason I'm bringing it up is it's kind of a things sometimes progress and change over time, both officially and unofficially.
There was also like the anti-trans military ban that was under Trump's presidency.
Yeah, some of that had to do with the idea of who's going to pay for the transition operation, and some of the medical fallout afterwards, because if you do transition into another either male to female, female to male, long term it requires extra medication and things like that. And there were those people in the military that basically were saying, well, if you do that before you go in, it may not be a big deal, but if you expect the government to pay for it after you get in, then that was part of the argument about it.
I do also get that the military is important, but I think that the government spends way too much on the military, and I think a lot of those should go into healthcare, housing.
Yeah, but there's quite a few people like that, and that believe that, and part of it has to do with, do we spend too much money overseas helping other countries when we should be, here helping, like you said, citizens here in the U.S.
Yeah.
I think that probably kind of flies into it. Well, I'm glad I could have this discussion with you today. And by the way, I like your T-shirt.
Thanks.
With those two characters are definitely unique. So nice talking to you.
You too.
Mark, how you doing? We've met before.
Yes, ma'am.
We're kind of getting into a little bit of discussion about autism in the military, and I've been doing some research on it, and possibly because of the whole definition of what is a disability has been looked at in the military. You've got people going back in missing limbs, stuff like that. But they're going to go back on active duty, things like that. Now they're starting to look more at the autism spectrum, and some of the research that I've been doing is that each of the individual services are trying to deal with it and trying to wrestle with it as to how can somebody on the specific areas of the spectrum of autism fit into military service. And I don't know if you had ever considered going in the military at one time or anything like that, or
It was something that I've acknowledged as a potential option.
yeah.
I did take the ASVAB. I did actually do PICAT, but I never did MEPS though.
Oh, okay.
And I got like an 89 on the ASVAB first try. So the Army guys in that office were practically scrambling to find me a uniform.
Yeah.
And then the next day I went up to Seattle for PICAT.
Right.
Didn't get to do MEPS though. And then afterwards, then the Army itself was like, okay, also, well, actually, they did not disqualify me. They
Right.
just said we would like to have these particular records, medical records,
Right.
essentially because we don't have them.
Right.
That's basically why. And I'm like, well, that information exists. That's just a very big stack of papers you've asked for.
Okay. Well, that's kind of some of the research I did. That's why I'm glad that you actually were one of the people that actually tried to get in. Was part of the research I did was that whole thing was
Yeah, it was.
the records bit.
Yeah, it was me. It was me poking my head into the office and seeing if it was an option.
Yeah.
And the door is not closed, and so I'm like, hey, there it is.
Yeah. The apparently the one thing that advice I did give was if it is in your medical record that you're anywhere on the autism spectrum, that don't lie about it, because they said that's the one thing they hate.
Yeah,
Somebody tried to, no matter how minor a medical problem is, if you try to cover it up, they don't want to deal with it because they're afraid you're going to try to cover up something bigger.
Yeah, that is the logic behind that. Yes.
Yeah. So, have you ever given it any more thought?
The thought was essentially confined to acknowledging it as a potential
Okay.
route. There hasn't been proper serious consideration into doing it. It's just like
Right.
but I acknowledge that it is a potential route. It's also the most well-funded organization in the U.S. are the armed forces, and it's like if it becomes possible to tap into that resource pool, that may benefit me.
Yeah.
But I also kind of like what I would be getting into may not be for me. I don't know for sure. It's just a lot of me being like, well, if I am going to go this route, I will probably put myself under a very strict moral and mental discipline to make sure that I don't lose myself in whichever branch it is, and whatever I happen to be doing within that branch. Very much continuing self-affirmation of just why I'm there and what I'm doing. That problem, because I don't see myself as career level military. My
Right.
ambitions would not be to spend the whole life there becoming an officer and then becoming a brass or something.
Right.
That's not my ambition.
But if they could give you some specialized technical training, that might be something that you might look at.
Yes. So because they have a lot of educational programs and they have a lot of things that they can teach, and I consider myself one who likes to learn, and if that is the route that I end up going, then that will be the route I end up going, though it is not my first choice.
Okay.
It's actually most likely that I'd be it would more likely be the service specifically I'd be going into, probably more likely be Navy though, actually.
Okay. They, like I said, all of the services apparently are wrestling with that because they have found out that some people on a specific spectrum of autism are very good at noticing when something is not right, noticing little glitches in a system or a machine or something that somebody else wouldn't notice, because they have a tendency of being a lot more focused than the average person.
Or detail oriented.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Probably a lot of their guys in archival departments too. Just because sometimes people on the autism spectrum are able to be very organized in their specific manner, and a smart service branch would basically be like, well, why not utilize this very attention to detail or this very organized thing to let them do what they're good at, which might be keeping records or listening to the radio or watching a radar screen.
Right, and is literally what they're looking at right now. is because of, I guess, the evolution of the whole idea of who is, what is the military and who can really fit in. They used to have, years ago, they used to have a specific image of what the military was. Well, things have changed, especially as we become much more involved with technology and things like that.
I think there was one point, either just before or during the Cold War, where they were very confused as to why some people who were Olympic level athletes were completely failing all their tests, while some random farm kid from Iowa was acing them, and they were like, okay, hang on, there's got to be something more to this. So they started really trying to figure out the idea of delving into the mental aspects of health is relatively pretty new in history, at least as far as modern history is concerned.
Well, that's true, and of course.
And so now the question is, how to utilize? Can this be utilized? If so, how? I think like I said, I think it is very dependent on case by case. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to do anything case by case because it requires a lot of work that a lot of people just find themselves sometimes unwilling to do because of just the sheer amount of it there is, which is irksome that the willingness to make sure is lacking.
And that's, I think, like you said, they are trying to deal with it on a case-by-case basis now, just for the reason that we both mentioned about the fact that there have been some specific skills and job careers and specific functions that people with a certain type of mindset actually excel at that somebody else wouldn't. Like I said, attention to detail and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what the military now is trying to look at, especially as we're getting more and more technical.
More and more into the digital age.
Exactly.
And the information age.
Yep.
That the ability to pay attention to specific bits of information becomes more relevant than ever as information is more and more compressed.
Yep. Well, I'm glad I could have this discussion with you today and everything, and I appreciate your assistance.
Maxwell. My name is Cyan. Very nice to meet you.
You too?
So I am in my 20s as well, and it seems like we're not supposed to have fun. Like we're supposed to just let the joy go away. We're supposed to not tap into our inner child anymore. And I don't feel that that's true. And I just wanted to know, like, what are your thoughts on adulting? Like, are we supposed to, let go of our childish or our children dreams, or are we supposed to, run after it?
I think that, as many things are, it's kind of a situational thing. But just to give an overall answer, just to start off, no, I do not think that adults, whether they are on the spectrum or not, should completely let go of their childhood whimsy when they get older. I mean, especially if you do want to have kids when you get older, then your kid isn't gonna want to be around someone who's always all business all the time, okay, you gotta go get a job. But I'm 5. No, you have to get a job now.
Right.
This is the real world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important for people to actually let themselves have a little bit of fun from time to time, have a hobby, allow themselves to crack jokes from time to time, be a little more goofy when they can.
Yeah.
It's just looping back around though. I think what gets people confused is those people who take things too far in the other direction and never actually grow up at all.
Yeah, they kind of hold on to just being young too harsh, and they don't open their eyes and look at reality.
Yeah, they don't like the people who don't want to get a job, who live with their parents but don't actually do any of the chores. They don't pay rent. They don't work for family business. They just they expect to just have everything handed to them still.
Yeah, yeah. So, as far as like having fun, what are some ways that you have found yourself having fun as an adult?
Well, for one, I suppose this is, I think this is kind of like universal, I suppose, but I found that when I can hang out with friends, I think it helps to like kind of let down your defenses a little bit and let yourself be a little silly, because like I really take pride in making people laugh. So I'm personally willing to be like the kind of like quirky guy in the group who I'm like always cracking puns and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's good, and it's honestly good for me, like not just to let myself be a little bit more silly, like outside of like my editing or like my writing and whatnot, but like it also just helped me feel like, hey, I just brightened someone's day.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like the idea of growing up has changed since like the early 1900s? Do you feel like it's kind of gone away from being like you go to school, you get good grades, you get a job, and you have kids in the house, to like kind of being more open to exploring what's out there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm personally actually very happy that like stigma of like, oh, you go to school, you go to college, you just have a family at 21.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my gosh, like I think I hear like some people like, oh, like they're married at 23. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would not be. I'm 22, and I would not be ready for that at like 25. It's just like, but I'm very happy that it's becoming more like people are saying, yeah, you can like obviously when you're an adult, maybe you'll keep your expectations more like realistic as opposed to owning a candy factory in space. But like, like I think if someone like always wanted to explore the world, I think it's good that like now that once you get into your 20s, the world is now saying like, hey, if you want to like just go off on your own and like see what this world has to offer, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think that's another good thing. Like not letting yourself get tied down. That's another thing that I think can help like with that like balance of adulting and like holding on to like your like more whimsical ideas, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Do you think that there's been do you think there's an area in adulting that just needs a little bit more sparkle?
Sparkle. Just like something more mundane that like needs more of a interesting edge. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something that just needs a little more oomph to it, to like make adulting seem not so dead.
Yeah, I think it really just comes to not losing sight of your own personality. I think that's a very universal thing these days, especially with the internet and how easy it is to like lose ourselves in like conversation. I think it just you should be able to. I think the thing about adulting is, as you get older, you should become more mature. You should be able to. You should like keep an eye on social situations, especially for someone on the spectrum. Read the room, but don't let yourself just be a complete like emotionless drone. Don't be afraid to open up when it is appropriate in a lighthearted environment.
Yeah, as someone that's on the spectrum, do you feel like it's harder for people to come up and talk to you about like other opportunities, just because of the older kind of research and history on it? Like we're not completely sure about everything in life, but do you feel like when somebody knows that you're on the spectrum, like you get treated a little bit differently?
Personally, I have not noticed it. But I feel like I'm sure that other people on the spectrum could answer that very differently. Personally, though, I think it's because it doesn't come up very often. Like, often I'll hear people talking about, wow, you're on the spectrum? I couldn't even tell. Which is kind of... Which I honestly don't really care for those kinds of comments, because like on one hand it's like, okay, it makes me feel good about my adulting, but on the other hand it's like, oh, there's that stigma,
Yeah.
But yeah, personally no, but I feel like a lot of people would, and I think it's, again, case by case basis. You don't have to, like, I don't want you to, like, baby me, you know, because I am an adult, you know. I have my, like, shortcomings and whatnot, but it's not because of my autism. It's because you know, I'm an adult who has shortcomings. So it's like, yeah, I would hope that people would not do that to me personally.
No, I completely understand. I personally feel that everyone should just be treated with kindness and should be treated, equally, just show love to one another and actually, try and introduce joy to people's lives, because a lot of times we get so stuck up in the news and in social media, it's really hard for us to come out and enjoy time with others.
Yeah.
But just to finish wrapping up this burrito, on adulting, do you see people on the spectrum becoming do you feel more seen now versus like when you were younger in in any kind of like movie or TV show? Like, do you feel like you guys are being represented, equally or fairly?
I think that representation is such a difficult thing in media because autism is a spectrum, so getting the representation down right is just so difficult. And sadly, I haven't actually seen that many representations of autistic characters, which is why I'm so thankful to be able to work with BlueFlix Films and be able to play these characters who actually are on the spectrum and like a different range of people on the spectrum. Like, I've played nonverbal characters, I've played like characters who are higher functioning like me, but like a little bit more childish. Then I've played people who are literally like me.
Yeah.
So I hope that becomes more of a thing, but in terms of being seen in general, I think we are on the right track, and I am happy that people are starting to like actually talk about this and realize, okay, yeah, it is a spectrum, and but that there is like a spectrum of people, and that we're not all the same. Some of us are different. Some of us are higher functioning. Some of us are lower, but we're still people, and we deserve to be heard.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you letting me know your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Daniel. My name is Cyan. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So I just was wondering, as someone who is, an adult, in their 20s, going into adulthood, what are some things that you've found that have helped you just stay kind of positive in life, like things that have brought you happiness?
I'll admit, like, doing weed has given me some happiness, but also like watching TV,
Playing
some games. I also watch a lot of movies.
Oh, okay, all right. So more of like indoor activities, kind of, really?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I do have, family members who are also on the spectrum, and sometimes I've noticed, being out especially in large groups of people, it's harder for them to really like communicate sometimes, and it's harder for them to have fun. But it's interesting that you say, that like playing video games and like watching movies has, brought you a lot of joy. Just because, with COVID hitting, like we were inside a lot, quite a bit actually, for about, I think, like 2 years. But I've also noticed, like, just from my family members in general, that the certain images and certain, like, drawing styles has been easier for them to learn and really, like, grasp concepts. Is that something you can relate to, or anything? Do you have any, like, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'd say so. Art really helps as well.
Yeah. Like the drawing style, kind of like the technique of it.
Yeah, painting's also fun.
Painting? Okay, so like more so like hands-on things.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So like I know video games have the consoles and whatnot. What are your thoughts on the virtual reality? because I know that's a new thing. And they have like different things. I think they have like wands. You can do it with a controller. There's like a little handheld gadgets as well. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that that there should be more to it, or do you feel like the VR is enough?
I'd say it should be expanded upon.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of ideas that people could come up with.
So, you know, having fun, inside is great and all, and I think that, as an adult, there's just some things that we're able to do as adults that we weren't able to do as a kid. Is there any example that you could give me, that something that you've done as an adult that you weren't able to do as a child?
I've been traveling a lot more as an adult now that I have my driver's license as well.
What are some places that you've been?
I've been to a lot of places in Western Washington, but I've also been to Slab City, California a while ago. I was there for like a week visiting some friends. And yeah, I definitely would not have been able to like go there as a kid.
Kind of steering back to what you had said about driver's license. That's definitely something that you can have as an adult that you can't have as a kid. So that kind of sense of freedom, do you feel like getting your license has given you another sense of freedom that as a kid you were like really looking forward to getting?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it like the freedom kind of, being able to get out of the house like when you want to, go where you want to, like anytime. Do you, or have you noticed, being an adult, there's a different view of fun than you had as a kid?
I guess I'm able to check more places out and not just go to the same places over and over again. Yeah. So you're able to experience the world more. Yeah.
Pretty much. Okay, yeah. So another thing that I've kind of, been kind of wondering about is, as a kid, we're asked, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And a lot of times it's like, I want to be a princess. I want to discover dinosaur bones. I want to be an astronaut. Really kind of big ideas, which is fun and it's great. But, like, as an adult, do you ever, like, kind of think back on those times versus, like, now when you're having fun, like, oh, as a kid, like, my kid self would love to do this, even though, like, you're doing this right now?
I think I've had memories like that, but I don't really completely remember them.
As a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I also wanted to be a singer. And as an adult, I was actually able to go to a lot of different concerts and see a lot of different singers, performances, even a couple comedies here and there. And then I was able to go to a few different courthouses and see what it was like in there, like for like jury duty or whatnot. So like that was kind of my moment of, there's a difference when it comes down to fun, because as a kid we're like, oh, this seems like fun, let me do it. And then in adulthood, sometimes it changes into being something a lot more serious than we think. Are there any moments where you've just kind of had a realization like, oh, this is a lot different than what I thought when I was younger?
Well, like, traveling feels different. I'd say, like, schools felt different for me by college. Let's see. Sometimes going to the movies has felt different because I go, like, a lot more than I used to.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have a great day.
Thanks.
Hi, Gregor. My name is Cyan. It's nice to meet you.
And to you.
So, being in your 20s, it's definitely a shift of lifestyle from being, a younger, like teenager, toddler, no, teenager, preteen, child.
Preteen, then teenager is usually how it goes.
Well, if you're going down.
Oh, if you're going down.
Yeah, it's like
okay.
adult, teen, preteen, child, toddler,
Adolescence.
baby, infant, whatever.
There's probably a different name for each year other than the number.
Right. So, being kind of like in your 20s, have you ever experienced a moment of joy that as a kid you never really thought of, like you never thought was, possible?
Well, joy is a bit of a strong word to use, but it was definitely a sense of accomplishment when I got first Universal Defender book published.
Oh, wow.
Just
Congratulations.
because, that was in March of last or a few years ago. I don't remember now. Either way, because it was just it was the sum of all the sessions of me, playing in the woods or in my backyard on my own and cooking up those stories. So it was definitely a very much a feeling of accomplishment. Though joy is probably too strong a word for any experience I've had.
All right. Well, I'll accept it.
Fair enough.
So, experiencing any kind of like, I'll use the word happiness. Any kind of like happiness. Have you noticed like your mindset kind of changed from the word fun as a kid to fun as an adult?
What I considered fun has not changed. I just figured out more ways to describe it as far as different levels of fun are concerned. So like, something being enjoyable versus something being actively fun versus something being fun in retrospect, what have you. What I've enjoyed doing hasn't really changed. I still enjoy, training in martial arts and, and acting out the stories that I have, just to cook up more of them.
Okay.
And other hobbies that I picked up along the way.
Yeah. All right. Have you ever thought, as a kid, like, oh, this would be really fun to do, like being an adult, it's so great, it's so fun. Did your mindset, like, do you feel differently now than you did as a kid, now that you are an adult? Like, do you feel that being an adult is fun, or do you feel like it kind of got kind of like stagnant, or just like kind of going down the boring line?
Well, stagnant could pretty much sum up my entire life, but that's a story for another time. I was one of the kids who was very glad to be out of high school, and then whenever I hear adults nowadays saying that enjoy the school years, they're the best you got, and I'm just like, they're so lying through their teeth. I was very happy to get out of the whole school life thing.
Yeah.
And then I spent a long time catching up on all the lost sleep, of course.
Oh.
I think we all did that.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely did. First couple months.
But yeah, I think at the time, my main thinking of it was I wasn't thinking about, what it would be like to be an adult too much, but I was kind of quietly acknowledging this is the thing that's eventually going to happen. I hope I'm prepared. At least prepared enough.
Yeah.
And I never saw it as a matter of fun versus more fun or less fun to be.
Okay.
But it was a relief to at the very least not be brushed aside for being young anymore, or
Okay.
have my opinion discredited, or whatever facts I bring to the table
Yeah.
overlooked. I was glad to be done with that whole segment of things. So there was sort of a relief that came with age. Of okay, now some people are actually seeing me as an adult now. It just was very hard before. It was just problem is that everybody who that for a while, there was a long time when the people who knew me as a kid and the people who knew me as an adult were the same group of people. So
Yeah.
it still remained kind of frustrating to try to talk to someone who knew me since who was already, you know, a middle-aged woman when I was 6. So it's
Yeah.
very hard for them to see me as, you know, past that. But credit where it is due, some family friends of mine or friends of my family have been making much more effort to be like, well, okay, now that this guy's finally moved out of that house and is finally, you know, is finally more asserting his own identity, you know, we can try basically meeting again. And credit to
Okay.
those where it's due.
Okay.
But it has always been kind of a, you know, it's always a surprise when somebody actually, you know, sees me as an adult. And I still
Yeah.
get surprised to it to this day. It's a welcome surprise, but a very surreal one. That I'm like, what? You're not just telling me to. You're not telling me shut up, Wesley. You know.
Yeah, understand. So, you know, kind of just carrying on with that, you know, definitely being an adult, you do get credited a lot more than being a kid. Do you feel as someone on the spectrum that it's harder for children on the spectrum to have fun because of their I don't want to call it a disability because I don't believe it's
Right,
a disability.
it's-
Just because of their
Being on the spectrum,
being on
or
the
however
spectrum.
that does end up manifesting.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's harder for them to have fun as a kid, or do you feel like, you know, it's just really just based on like the understanding as humans that we have of it?
What I can tell you is that it was frustrating for a while to communicate, you know, what I considered to be fun, and what have you. So I think a lot of the frustration and the less fun, like where there's no difference in capability to have fun. What
Yeah.
often the difference is, I have found, is that it's in the difference in the ability to communicate what is enjoyable. To say, hey, I enjoy these things, or I have taken up an interest in this.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and then in doing the thing that is interesting, that is itself fun, but a lot of times it can be and has been frustrating to try to communicate that I enjoy this or I don't enjoy this. And then also in regards to, you know, having a very hard time to have autonomy respected as a kid. You know, you know, you're your own. You are the best authority on yourself, and yet, and I say I enjoy this. I don't enjoy this. Why are you still telling me that I should do the other thing first when I could be better put to this other task that I actually enjoy doing? Like, could you maybe smartly use your resources, put people to the tasks they like doing because they're gonna, and then it's just baffling. You know how that completely seems to sail right over everyone's head, and you end up just completely frustrated because it's incomprehensible to you why there's a clear solution here, and it's like they're dodging it. Like, come on, you guys. And then also, and also what also is frustrating is that adults often refuse to even explain or justify what it is. Like if I question something, you know, you can give me an answer and I'll be like, okay, yeah, that is an answer. I see why that you have answered that way. But parents especially just never feel the need to explain these things when they should be explaining why they have reached given decisions. And it just kind of goes back to into a very constant, seemingly inability for parents to recognize that their kid is a person in and of themselves and has and can form their own opinions, and then you just explain, damn it. Like, come on, just like if I've asked you a question, it's because I want an answer. It's not me talking back to you. I just want to know what the answer is.
Right, yes.
So a little bit of a ramble there, sorry, but
That's okay. Thank you so much for letting me know, you know, how you feel and your insights on things. It really does open my eyes a lot more to, you know, people that are on the spectrum and kind of the difference between the two of us. But there's not that much of a difference anyway, because we're both still humans. But thank you so much.
all right, glad to be of help.
My name is Dax, and I'm here to talk to you about bullying.
All right.
So, can you tell me something about how you felt when you was bullied?
Well, I haven't had. Well, I have been bullied, but I haven't had the typical like experience that most people think when they think bullying.
Okay, tell me about
It's also very difficult because while I am still rather sensitive as an adult, I was especially sensitive as a child and very easily misinterpreted. Well, I was growing up with autism. I was still kind of learning like social norms and whatnot. So I'd often interpret things as insults or personal grudges against me that weren't.
Okay.
Yeah. But I believe the main thing that happened. I used to take karate when I was younger.
Okay.
Got decently far, I suppose. I got to like what was it? It was like I got to a purple belt,
Oh,
but
cool.
haven't really like particularly practiced since then. It was like
Okay.
you stay at a purple belt for a while and they give you like these little tape stripes for like
Yeah.
different like stages. Yeah, it shows how much I know about karate because I'm not sure if that's even like a normal thing, but it was at my local dojo, I suppose. So
Okay.
yeah, and that was all right. But when I was younger, I would often go into because I always kind of wanted to be by my parents, and I grew up with two moms.
Yeah.
I'd often go into the like women's like dressing room and whatnot, and it was never like a big deal. I like never really saw anything, but some of those girls would just like were always like talking to behind my back, and always such a weirdo and all that jazz, and like. In my mind, I literally didn't think anything of it. It's like this is where my mom is, so I'll go in there. Yeah, and eventually, I did go into like the other changing room. I actually want to say it was because I was specifically some of the like teachers specifically talked about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like made like a big deal out of it. I don't remember ever making anyone uncomfortable or anything. But like, I think it's I think what I had to deal with was mainly people not really getting how I worked, and I can understand that in like hindsight, but like I don't know if it's better or worse when no one ever like actually talked to me about it. But then again, like I had like such social anxiety that might have made it worse.
Oh.
But, yeah.
Well, I understand that very well because I too is socially inclined, as you would call it. People don't get me a lot either. So I get it. I've been called weirdo, or I love zombies. So everything about me is zombies. Everything that come out of me is zombies.
Yeah.
So they think that's weird. And so I can understand how people take or misinterpret how a person is, and rag on it because they just don't know. And to be honest, that's wrong because people have their own niche or their own thing that they like to do, and it doesn't have to be wrong because they're not doing it. It's just not their thing. And I think you're perfect.
Thank you.
So, everything about you is perfect, and I love it. So, forget them. But bullying is wrong, and no matter how it comes or how it looks or how it's being said, it's not right. And for someone to do that, or to say that, or to make someone feel less than is very much wrong. And we have to change the way we look at bullying and how we view it as a social norm, because when we look at bullying and we look at how it affects people in different ways, we have to take back the reins and say, hey, this is not right. Your way is not always the only way. There's a million ways to do different things. There's a million ways to be. There's a million ways people are. So just because it's not fitting in your little box doesn't mean we have to step out of our comfort zone to come into your box. And that vice versa, we don't have to go into your box.
Yeah.
We can just be who we are, take off the mask, the blinders, and everything else, and be who we are without being accepted as different or wrong or seen as, we're going to get attacked every time we walk out the door for who we are. And to change that, we have to start with, I always say this, we always have to start with the top and work our way down.
Yeah.
Because if we work our way from the bottom and going to the top, by the time we get to the top, everything will be misconstrued.
Yeah.
So we definitely have to change the way we look at bullying from the higher up standpoint.
Bullying isn't just like a thing in like high school, in like elementary or whatever. It's like things may change as you get older, but people do still bully you. Like maybe trolls online.
Oh yeah.
Like everyone always says like, oh, it's for those freaking kids. But unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that a lot of those people, especially some of the more people who do like cross that line from bullying into pretty much almost downright like hate speech, those are adults, and it's because they're adults who are so what's the term I'm looking for? It's not discontent. Is that the word?
It could be, yeah.
Unsatisfied, that's what I'll say, with their current life. That the only way they can feel fulfilled is to put down other people. And I've had that happen to me from people who, and that's the case with like, I have seen like a few kids like who just be like, hey, I got them. But then I've had like people my age who just like will come up and like online and just like belittle everything I say or like put everything down. And then when I like try and reach out to them, like try and be like, hey, I get what you're going through, then they'll literally shut me down.
Right.
And then they'll be like, hey, you can't say that, you don't know me. And it's like, but it's like, it's hard, it's very difficult because, and that's also the case with like, it can take different forms.
Right,
and that's,
right.
it's not all just like someone like shoves you into a locker. It can be like that like passive aggressive thing. Or, like, it can be, like, someone you think is a friend, but then when you look back at it, you're like, this person was kind of really horrible to me.
Right.
And, I think being more informed about that is what we need to do. And, like you said, we need to start at the top because I think it is safe to say it is a cycle.
It is.
As many things are. Because often people who perpetuate the cycle were mistreated themselves.
Right.
And I'll admit, after like having to deal with some of those people, it is just so easy to just snap, especially like online with that I always butcher this word, anonymity.
Yep.
Yeah. But like I always just tell myself, no, you're just gonna make that'll just make you part of the problem. And I'm like, the best I can do is strive to not fall to their level,
Right. We never want to come down to their level. We want to bring them up to ours. And by doing that is to make them see that what they're doing is hurting someone else, or to make it personable where they can relate to it and see that this could be their mom, their dad, or somebody that they know.
Yeah.
I find that works a lot because half of the time, like you said, majority of them is learned behavior from previous, family members or back in their day. And
Or
it's
the
just,
friend circle.
Yep. And it's just passing down through generations. And then by the time it gets to where they're at, they're like, okay, well, this is the norm.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to break the cycle, break it from the top, coming all the way down, and by the time they finish that cycle, they can't pass it on to their children and the generation after that because bullying would no longer be existing. And if we take that and pull it and stop it, pull the plug on it, then that way we can get on to what we want to do and live life the way we want to live it.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you talking with me. and I had a great time. Hi, Daniel. My name is Dax, and I'm here to talk to you today about bullying. So, tell me something about how you feel about being bullied.
Well, it sucks. I've been bullied before, and it's not great. I mean, I get along with people a lot more nowadays, but back then I didn't.
Yeah. And it just made you upset when you was being bullied, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was bullied too when I was in school, so I understand your pain and your frustrations about it. Well, what are one things that we can do to stop bullying?
I think it'd be better to like educate kids on like social relationships, and also teach kids what's not okay to do.
Oh, that is very important, yeah. And to also back that up, you know, when someone is being bullied, you know, show them the right way that is to respond to the bullying, and have the bullying also sit in and say, hey, you know, this is what you've done to this person, and this is how it feels. You know, sometimes it only takes a moment for the bully to actually see that this is what is affecting that person, or how it's affecting that person, to make them see that it's like, oh, I've done something bad or damaging to someone else. And half of the time, they don't even realize that they're damaging someone else because they're just too busy focusing on doing or getting the result that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, tell me something that you have done that when you was being bullied that got you over it and out, you know, on the other side.
Well, I admittedly didn't really make the best decisions as a kid. Like, sometimes I've gone to fights with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that happens, you know. Sometimes we tend to let our anger get the best of us, and we, you know, I always say, you know, the 3 C's, you know, just sit there in consistency, you know, the change, the challenge, and the charge. And you with the charge instead of the consistency of change and, yeah, the outcome of it. But, you know, we can always work that out and change it, and now you got a better outlook on it, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So, you know, those things is what we use from this day forward to move forward and, you know, make that change in being bullied.
Yeah.
You know, when I was in school, I had a couple of kids who was bullying me, you know, because I like to keep my hair cut low. They would call me roosters and, you know, names and all kinds of things. And I had this one guy, you know, after school, he would chase me, run and throw rocks at me. And I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with this boy? You know, but then one day I fought back, but not with fighting, you know, I fought back with words. And I told him, I said, well, imagine you throwing a rock at your sister. I said, well, right now I'm your sister and you're throwing a rock at me. Or imagine one of your friends throwing rocks at your sister, doing you the same way you're doing me. And how would you feel? And, you know, he looked at it as like, well, I'm not listening to you at the moment. But I said, well, once you hit me, you know, and I started bleeding, I said, well, just think about it. I said, this could be your sister. You know, this could be your mom, your aunt, or someone else. So, you know, when the bullying happens, you know, you have to make it relatable and personable to that person and get them to see that it's something that they're doing wrong and something that they can change, you know. And so by me getting to him to realize that, you know, hey, I could be his sister in the same position, he was like, okay. And then he actually came over and tried to help me after hit me in the head and I'm bleeding everywhere. So it was weird, but the outcome was good. Not all ends like that, but that was one example of where we could change a bullying's mind.
For me, a lot of it was verbal, but it was pretty bad in general.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry that happened to you.
All good. Sometimes teachers stepped in, but I mainly got older and started to fight back, and that was not a great idea for me.
Who was your support system during that time?
I didn't really have much of one, admittedly.
Yeah. I'm coming to find that a lot lately. A lot of kids not having the support system that deals with bullying at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And during that time, did you feel alone, or did you feel like that nobody was listening or nobody cared, or how was you feeling?
I guess no one was listening.
Okay. Gotcha.
I usually, sometimes I've fought back, not physically, but gotten in arguments.
Okay. And now that you're older, do you see a difference in being bullied younger versus older?
I guess so, but I haven't really experienced as much older.
Okay. Gotcha. So, if you ever come into, if you ever be bullied again, hopefully you won't. There are steps that you could take, for one, if you don't have anyone to go to or someone to say, hey, I'm being harassed or bullied, then you take the measures in your hands and you say, hey, make it personable to the point that they have to look at it in a different way. Sometimes bullies, they're so quick at coming at you with different stuff that they don't really take the time to see that, okay, this could be someone I know, or this could be something that's detrimental to me. And trying to get them to relate to that is a big thing. Another thing that we could do is just basically try to, I guess, if you can walk away, the best thing is to walk away, out of sight, out of mind type stuff, Thank you for talking to me today, and I really appreciate you sharing your stories with me.
No problem. Good to meet you.
Yes. Alrighty. Hi, my name is Dax, and I'm here to talk to you about bullying. Can you tell me something about how you feel about bullying?
I feel as though schools tend to have the absolute worst reactions possible to it. And it's something that is, the terribleness of schools in addressing and dealing with it is no stranger to me. In retrospect, I'm sort of only realizing now that a lot of people tried to be, my bully throughout grade school, but there was only ever two people who ever really got under my skin, and arguably only one of them was really the nemesis. The other just tried and kind of bounced off. But there's of course a whole other set of reasons as to why a lot of the ones who tried just kind of failed.
Yeah.
But what schools fail to understand is that essentially the problem there are ways schools are really bad at addressing it because they'll punish both parties for existing, right?
Right.
They tend to do a lot of blaming the victim as rather than even the perpetrator. Like, as in, bullies know that if they get into a fight, both students are going to be punished, and they do not care about their own punishment because otherwise they wouldn't be doing it.
Correct.
And it is always incredibly appalling and frustrating how anti-self-defense schools are,
Yeah.
and they'll tell you that you should advocate for yourself, but as soon as you do, they'll slap you with a suspension or expulsion for having done so, because they're like, oh no, not like that. No, do it in the way that means that we don't have to do anything,
Yeah.
or
that's
something like
true.
that, which is essentially a thing that does not exist. Very.
Yeah, I didn't think about it like that, but you're right. Schools do punish both parties. Both get suspended, or expelled when they have done something, or one or the party who's being bullied fight back. That is true. And that should be changed. And I agree.
They seem to be under administrators seem to be under this delusion that that bullies have a reason, when in fact some men just want to watch the world burn.
Yeah.
They're like, well, what did you do? When they ask stuff like, well, what did you do to anger them? Like, nothing. This is just the way that they've decided to act at this place, and I wasn't like constantly fighting in school.
Okay.
But I did not trust teachers and what have you to do what was necessary. So there were a non-zero number of physical altercations between me and a given bully. Because I just like, look, I know that this school isn't going to do anything, so if I have to, then so be it.
So you didn't trust the school system to protect you from the bullies?
Well, yeah, because they didn't.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. And when that happened, it made you feel like you had to take authority and do something to protect yourself from the bullies.
Right.
Versus them coming in to save you from the bullies.
It was sort of this constant understanding that they're not going to.
Right.
So, better learn to save myself.
Right. Yeah. I felt that way too. I was bullied in school too. And most of the time they would wait till after school to bully me. But majority of the time they was taunting me all during the school day and saying, I'm going to get you when you leave. So I do understand that. And then even after I did tell the teachers, nothing was done.
But they always had the same, grab bag of non-advice advice.
Yes.
And they just they really like their buzzword no bullying bits. That means that they are kind of free of that they make themselves free of obligation by offering advice, saying, well, I did what I could. Like you said, words are wind and air.
Yeah, and we need action.
Yes.
In this day and age, bullying needs to be addressed not just by words but by actions, and actions means that we need to protect the kids, we need to protect everyone from being bullied regardless of what it is, and by putting that action in place, it shows that we are actively listening, we're actually doing something, and we're actually taking away the bullying versus what's happening. Because right now, a lot of kids are being bullied. I had one of the youth that I work with, killed themselves because they said that they felt like they was alone and no one was listening. And by the time I could get to them, they had already did what they did. But I wanted them to know that, they wasn't alone. It's just that the school failed them. And it did not protect them like they should. And being a person of LGBT, and knowing how they felt, that was hard for them to be bullied about who they are, in a world and society of where you have to be something that you're not and portray because you're afraid to be bullied. And you can't go to school to be your authentic self because you have to hide behind the covers or a mask to be something other than who you are. And that is wrong, and we should do more to protect versus go out and have this happen.
It's like treating a symptom rather than a cause.
Yeah.
You know, admittedly, that's not what I was bullied over, or at least what I was attempted to be. It was usually, height. I was a short kid, and I also was generally last pick in sports just because I had asthma. But then I, of course, I was still pretty able-bodied. I just happened to be short and also very, seclusional. So it was easy, but it was also funny because it was really hard sometimes for them to actually get under my skin because of general social ineptitude and not really figuring these things out. A lot of the times I didn't even recognize that they were trying to do that. So it ended up frustrating them a lot, and I was only kind of realizing now in retrospect there were well over a dozen people who tried. Only one was ever my nemesis, and another was annoying at best. And I mean, there is a definite reason for that, and the reason is that no bully could ever make me feel more miserable than my mother could.
Oh.
So, it was like these guys were like, guys, well, I was even telling people like, guys, those are rookie tactics.
Tell me more about the way you felt about being bullied in that moment. When you said the nemesis was coming with light or tactics?
Well, Nemesis wasn't doing the rookie tactics. Everybody else was. I was, telling them like, guys, these are rookie insults. Come on, I've been raised on the internet. These are terribly rookie insults. But no, the one person who ever was Nemesis, right?
Right.
And it was the most frustrating thing about it was that he always carried a +1 to act as his witness. So therefore they would they just say whatever, and then administrators would say majority rules because we're mindless. We don't want to address a problem. We just want to give people a random frog mascot who is and a bunch of cliche words. And then pat ourselves on the back and say we did it.
Right. And what did you do to counteract their attacks on you?
Well, there were a couple times when, one time, I was trying to land a few roundhouse, few hooks on them, but they were faster at foot running than me. So if nothing else, it was keeping them away. One time, the guy did get a pretty solid hit to his chest, and he acted very surprised.
Okay.
And I'm like, what do you mean you're surprised? And then of course there were suspensions for both of us as a result.
Yeah.
And I mean, when it came to the suspension itself, I was like, I comprehend that you're doing that, but also you're an idiot. Like, congratulations, you are a fool.
Right. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Well, I got him back. I'm fine with that. I got him back.
Okay.
For that fact alone. If it weren't for that fact, I'd be a lot more bitter about it.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking with me and sharing your stories with me, and
Hey Maxwell, I'm Brienne. I am a narrative poet and also an artist. And sometimes I write regular fiction too, I suppose. But in general, I'm just kind of a creative person. I like working in the arts and doing creative things because that helps me to express myself and what I'm feeling and my thoughts about the world and what I think the world is or what it should be. Yeah. What type of creative stuff do you like, and why do you like to do it?
Well, I like a lot of different forms of the arts. Like, I am very much like you. I work for a nonprofit that dabbles in all sorts of things. So art, gaming, music, film. And I work in many of those divisions. I work as an editor, I work as a artist, I work as a writer, and those are all things I have passion for in equal supply, because growing up, even before I could talk, I loved to draw. I would, my mom would get me these big old packs of Sharpies and these massive like binder books of like blank pages, and I just draw all day at my little drawing desk in the living room, listening to music, and I absolutely loved it. It was a great way for me to express like stories in my head in a very simple way, even without any like dialogue per se. Like it was all like it all played out in like my head, and that's something I've carried over into my adult years as well. I really believe that media reflects our society and can like change it for the better.
Absolutely.
And it's my like lifelong dream to like contribute to that with both characters I came up with when I was a child to inspire kids to also, you know, contribute to the arts and like get their ideas out there, as well as characters I've literally come up with like 3 years ago that I'm just really passionate about. And the ways I'd like to bring them into the world are the same as the things I'm doing for Blue Forge, and that's through editing, writing, but especially writing and art.
What kind of editing?
Video editing specifically.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. Well, though not. I actually don't have much of an interest in live action, which is interesting because a lot of I am actually an actor, and I act in a lot of projects that I am very passionate about, but none of my personal projects, well, many of them maybe, I think in an ideal world, might be voice acted. I don't actually think I'd ever do anything live action. Like at least like a long-running series, and those are like my overall goals, I would say. Like when it comes to the arts, I'd like to make like a series that I think people would really like. That like takes the best of like what I like from media and like puts it through my own lens. And I think that's why that's why I like encouraging people to like share their stories, because everyone always says, going on a bit of a tangent here.
You're fine.
Well, like there's no new stories, but I'd argue there are, because
So
one
many.
person telling their take of the same story is not going to be the same as the other person.
Exactly. Every single person can tell the same story, and we're going to get millions of variations of that story. And it's going to be different, and it's going to affect different people in different ways, totally. Yeah. I definitely get that. I think I'm drawn to the arts and to creative things for very similar reasons to you. For me, one of the biggest draws is being able to tell stories, whether they're fictional stories or whether they're just like true stories that happened to me.
Yeah.
To be able to tell stories that other people can relate to and go, oh my gosh, somebody else went through that. Somebody else experienced that. It's not just me. Because I know I felt a lot of loneliness when I was younger, because I thought that there was stuff that it was literally just me. And I found books that were primarily fiction, but some nonfiction too, where I would read them and be like, oh my gosh, this character went through it, and that character went through it. And I would say I find that even to this day, there's been characters that I've related to as an adult where I've been like, oh, I went through the same thing that they're fictionally going through. Though I would say I also have a series from when I was a kid that I have characters that I made when I was a kid. That's a fantasy series that I also want to bring to life now. It's all in the works. It's all in my brain. But it's basically, it's my take on fantasy. So it's high fantasy, but it's got characters. Well, first it's got some badass female characters, which there's just not enough of in fantasy, even to this day. There's more and more the longer that time goes on, which is awesome. But like, I want to see me and my friends represented in high fantasy. And like queer characters represented in high fantasy, which is like we're just barely cracking the surface of that. So I absolutely agree with you. I think that every single story can be retold, even if you're saying it's legitimately just the same framework over and over and over again by anyone.
Yeah, and that
Absolutely.
is one of the greatest things. I didn't mention that because I went on a little bit of a spiel, but
Yeah.
that is one of the things that's so important, is that even if it isn't like a autobiographic, is that the term?
Yeah, autobiography or autobiographical.
Autobiographical, thank you. It's even if it's not an autobiographical story, you can still write your experiences into characters. And in fact, sometimes it's more powerful if you write it into like an actual world as opposed to just telling it, because like then people can like actually relate to it more, because it feels less like you're telling them something directly and more like, oh.
Absolutely. I always see that as kind of the step up. Like, that's where I, as a writer, want to get to.
Yes.
Right now, I'm finding a lot of power in just, like, telling my stories.
Yeah.
Just saying, this is what happened. It happened to me, and it was real.
Yeah.
But, like, where I want to get to is where I can really tell those stories through the lens of other characters. Because then it makes it a little bit more accessible. Because
Yes,
it's not just,
exactly.
like, this is real, it happened, and it's scary, or this is real, it happened, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
But, like, oh, it's a fantasy character. There's all these other things to make it easier to understand and easier to relate to.
Yeah, and there's all types of fiction, which is what I especially love. I think I think what I'd like to do ultimately is I've always been taking efforts not to get like pigeonholed as writing or like editing one thing or another.
Yeah.
But my favorite kinds of art, no matter what it is, are the kind that can jump from serious to humorous on like the flip of a switch, because like, and those I think make for the most effective narratives, because you can get invested in the comedy, and when they go through hardships, you're like, oh, I want to see these guys get better because I was enjoying the lighthearted parts.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And that, and they're just, as I said before, there's rooms for all sorts of stories, and I'm happy that people are realizing everything doesn't have to be all humorous or all serious all the time.
Oh, yeah, the genre bending,
Yes.
I think, is just fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in like little subtle ways. It's just like, that's the kind of thing that I love the arts for, and I'm very glad that seems like the direction we're going in.
Yeah, definitely.
Just so long, I think just one more thing. I think it's important that stuff does know when to take itself seriously. Because sometimes with like
yes.
comedic works, they'll make you think they're going to take something seriously, and then they don't. And that actually works more to its, like that's like self-deprecation. That usually works more against the work than it does for it. And I wish more people had more confidence in their art to, write something that they can really stand by without being like that tongue-in-cheek, like, haha, gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I think, especially as creative people, we can tend to be, I'm not going to speak for all creative people, or even for you, but I know for myself, I can tend to be insecure about my art.
Oh, yeah,
I've often
same.
said, I don't really want feedback on my poetry. I just want to write it, and this is what I wrote, and it can go into the world, and I'm not looking to join a writer's group because I'm a little bit too sensitive for that. But yeah, I think it would be better if creative people could feel more secure in what they've made and feel. I think for me as a creative person, that was a huge leap when I finally read back a piece that I had written. And I was like, this is really good. I really, I'm proud of this. I'm happy about this. This is fantastic. And it's hard because, again, can be insecure about my own creative things. But
Oh, who isn't?
I think that that's something definitely to strive toward, to have pride in your work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think it's important.
Absolutely.
Well, Maxwell, thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, no problem.
Wow, this was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel. I'm Brienne, and I am a narrative poet and an artist, and I find that creativity and expressing myself through the arts really helps me to connect with other people and kind of express myself and the world and how I want to see the world change. What kind of art do you like to do? What kind of creative stuff, and why do you like to do it?
One of the things I like to do is write scripts. I've got a few in production. Still working on some of them.
Cool. What kind of genres do you like to write in?
I kind of like to write crime thrillers, but also sometimes like dramas.
Cool. I mostly write contemporary fiction or nonfiction. I like to write about stuff that I've lived through and stuff that's happened to me, because I found a huge amount of power in being able to read a book or a poem or see a film where I can go, oh, I've lived through that. And to me, it helps me feel not alone, and that this thing that has happened to me has happened to just me. Though when I write fiction, I do really like to explore urban fantasy and explore science fiction, and sometimes kind of blend them. There was a story that I wrote for the first volume of Unnerving, which is a horror anthology that I wrote that was kind of like urban fantasy mixed with science fiction. And the way that I wrote it was that there was a young woman, she's going to a like Midsummer's Eve party, kind of like a rave in the middle of the forest kind of a thing. And she seems like she's just, like drinking some, smoking some weed some, and is just kind of out of it. But we start to flash to her in this other reality, and she's actually been put into kind of like this virtual environment where her body is just like in a medical bed in a hospital, but she's seeing and exploring all of these different things, and we start to get that narrative through some of the characters like in this fantastical urban fantasy type world that are kind of like like kind of like fairy demon type creatures. But I like to be able to use those kind of ideas to talk about mental illness, the way that we treat mental illness, the idea of, do we treat it to the point where the person is literally comatose, but they're okay? Or do we let them kind of work through it, kind of just to open up that kind of discussion?
A lot of the stories I write are like about living under capitalism in like the middle of the city, and basically how people my age struggle through it. One of my stories is basically how this guy turns to crime in order to like survive living in the city. I keep changing it. I'm thinking of like mafia cartel type situations.
Cool. Oh, I like that. Capitalism is, I feel like, something that isn't actually a system that is permanent. That's something that can actually sustainable, I think is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So that's powerful. That's really powerful.
Thanks.
I've always seen the kind of the opposite spectrum of capitalism is socialism, and I always laugh because whenever we have something like, say, a bicycle or something that we don't need, I'll just go and put it on the corner, and I laugh because I'm always saying that I'm kind of forcing socialism on people, because somebody will just come by and go, oh, it's a free bike, cool, awesome, and I'm like, yep, because I had it and I didn't need it, but you did, and now you have it, and there was no exchange of money. But I have actually always really strongly believed in socialism. When I was in high school, some of those like internet quizzes first started, where you could like answer a whole series of questions about like politics, and it would tell you like, this is where you fit on the spectrum of politics, and it talked about a lot of different types of government that I hadn't really learned about too much in school. But it stuck me squarely in socialism. And as like a senior in high school in like the early 2000s, I was like, wait, socialism isn't that bad. Like that's like the 50s, the commies, like that's not good, especially coming from a Navy family.
Yeah.
And I think over the last like 15 years, I've really done a lot of like unconditioning of that, of like, this isn't just like socialism bad, capitalism good. Like, capitalism is something that can't really sustain, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and it puts a lot of us in these positions where like we're struggling to survive, and we feel, and I think that mental health plays into it too, which I'll just keep rambling about mental health until the cows come home. But I think that a lot of our mental health issues that we deal with in our current society are because of capitalism, because we're living in a way that humans were never meant to live in. We weren't meant to go, oh, I need to earn money so I can buy. We're supposed to like go and find berries, go and hunt animals, go and, spend our days taking care of ourselves. And like, it's so hard to do that now because we're trying to just be able to pay rent or gas. I don't even want to start talking about gas.
I'm more socialist leaning. I have been since after high school. Like, I think it's been harder to save money, and it's also like kind of impossible to find housing under a minimum wage job.
Oh, absolutely. It's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why we see so many people trying to find like different ways to live, like people living out of vans and doing this whole like van life, touring the country. But I think a lot of it is like, it's easier to buy a van and pay for gas in a van than it is to get an apartment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's just wild. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, and I'm really looking forward to see what kind of films you make, and yeah.
No problem.
Hi, Trigger. My name's Brienne. I am a poet and an artist, and I really enjoy working in the arts and working on creative projects. What kind of creative projects interest you, and why do you like to create?
Well, to answer the first question, writing, carpentry, metalworking to a degree, though I haven't been able to get into that as much as I'd like to, and landscaping, as well as generally doing things with my hands actively, and also making music and, I already said writing, but yes.
Deserves twice.
Sure, why not? The second question, oh yeah, that is a thing. But anyways, the reason why I enjoy creating is because, what else am I gonna do?
Fair.
It's something that my mind likes to do. I was the kid at school who was, sitting who was just in some corner of the field, waving around a stick at invisible foes and fighting in the glorious battle of the Sonex Wars. That was the name of it. That became its whole entire thing in and of itself. A lot of the stories that later got adopted for Universal Defender, that sci-fi series I've done. But it is a worthy way of expressing oneself that I've found, and that I have found that I am at least capable of, if I might even dare say good at.
Definitely. I find that I have to create. Like, my brain just kind of like is drawn toward that. Like you're saying, whether it's something like writing or something that's literally like working with the earth with my hands, just changing what my surroundings look like.
Yeah.
I'm definitely like, my brain just craves that.
For me, it's more like upgrade the surroundings.
Totally.
Like enhance them.
Yeah,
Make them
absolutely.
the optimal versions of themselves.
Definitely, yeah. When you're writing, what type of themes do you like to explore?
Well, in the flagship series, the three main themes you'll find in Universal Defender are the value of courage, the value of defiance, and humans are garbage. In the fantasy series the fantasy novellas I've been doing, they're just kind of fun little one-offs that often come off of like a single prompt. Usually, like someone says an idea that's like, wow, I could make something of that. And since Blue Flash is a thing, that's a lot more viable, since now I no longer have to take this one silly little idea and turn it into a 50,000 word thing. That's always been a struggle for me. Is length, just because with how deliberately I often choose my words. I end up telling a full story just in a lot less words. So it's like it's kind of like the antithesis of the Scarlet Letter, but I think that's actually a favorable thing.
That's I think a very good thing, because I consider myself pretty well read. When I was in school, I was the kid who like once or maybe even twice a week would hit the library with a stack of books this big, return all of them, get another stack, and like just burn through them. But the Scarlet Letter, I could not read. I hated it.
Yeah,
I hated everything about it.
I think a lot of us had that same exact thing.
And like I like the classics. I read Grapes of Wrath. I read Her Eyes Were Watching God, and To Kill a Mockingbird, and like a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of like those classics. But the Scarlet Letter, like,
is the
I'm
nemesis.
out.
Never.
I don't think I made it into chapter 3.
That's not a book. That's an endurance test.
Yeah, no, it was. It was. Thank you, Spark Notes.
Yeah. For me, what I was doing is I was going to the library, checking out one book, would come out the next day having finished that one. So it wasn't a pile; it was one at a time, just that I wouldn't lose them.
Yeah.
But I remember a couple times when I was in middle school, specifically, I had to convince the librarian to let me check out Michael Crichton's Prey when I did that, because like this middle schooler who hasn't hit his growth spurt yet is reading Prey.
Right. I like
and
that.
also the Deptford Mice trilogy, which belongs in that that oddly populated category of stories about mice and rats absolutely destroying each other in some of the most graphic ways possible. Like Deptford Mice, you had eldritch cats essentially.
So like take Redwall and then just like to the nth.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, pretty much. Yeah. We have one character who was a witch, immolate herself just to not get possessed by the main baddie Jupiter.
Possession's bad.
Yeah, possession's bad. Okay. We had multiple disembowelments and what have you. Just rodents absolutely destroying each other is strangely niche but highly populated subgenre of fantasy. I found.
Well, and I feel like just accurate. If you've ever seen rats.
Yeah.
They're pretty brutal. Yeah. I get that. I definitely relate to wanting to condense what you're saying, because definitely like writing through poetry, like I just like I pick the words and like those are the words and those are the words that you get. And if there's extra ones that slip into your mind, that's cool. If there's extra ones that might fit in between some of those words, cool. But like I have condensed it down to like this is it.
I even nicknamed the phenomenon in which the idea for like a feature-length movie or an hour-long TV episode fits into like 4 pages once you've written it out.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is why I hate word minimums. More recently what I've been reading is Snow Crash, and then reading and rereading the Book of Five Rings.
I don't think I've read that.
That's getting into philosophy, because because I've also been working through the Letters to the English Nation and Fear and Trembling.
Oh, okay. I haven't read a lot of philosophy.
Yeah, well, as my dad said, most professions, they have the decency to be forgotten about once you stop practicing them. But what you learn in philosophy will fuck you up for life.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know. I think the written word has a lot of power in that way. I think I've had books that I've read that on the kind of the opposite side that will stay with me for life, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
When I've been reading through Snow Crash, like the first 15 pages, and I'm like, okay, I need a drink.
Yeah. I haven't read. Oh, it's been.
It's a good one. I've been enjoying it so far. In this sort of like, in between having to buy a bottle after reading 15 pages, like. Yeah. But like in a good way.
Yeah.
Like in the way that this is very effectively communicated and written.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
One of the struggles I've often found with just the written word is that at least today and what have you, it's been really hard to gain traction with it, just because most people don't really, I mean, at least in my experience, most people aren't really wanting to read as much as read the comic version of it or see the movie, but because because the written word is the one that requires the most work of the reader to consume properly, I think, or at least one of the highest that is on the user to experience fully.
I find it really interesting. I've thought about this a lot. I wonder if when I was growing up, if there was the kind of access that there is to media right now. Like, kids growing up right now, like, they have streaming, they have, at any moment, they can pull up a brand new story. I mean, Netflix has hundreds of thousands, if not more than that. I don't have a real number, but so many different offerings. And I'm not trying to tout Netflix. I'm just, as an example. But I know for me, it was like I had this like craving for stories when I was a kid.
Right.
And I wonder now, like, if I had those available to me, if I would have been such a voracious reader. Because I find it interesting now. I have to stop myself from going, oh, I need to start this new Netflix series that everybody's watching. And I'm like, what about the 20 books that I'm waiting to read?
It's funny you should talk about Netflix series that everybody's watching, because whenever I've been watching stuff on Netflix, it's always been the stuff like no one else did.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed Into the Badlands and Ragnarok. And
yeah.
The Badlands in particular, that's a good show. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm usually a holdout. Like, I just watched Umbrella Academy because they put out their 3rd season. So I was like, oh, fine, I'll try this.
For me, I almost experience the opposite, where it's like the more somebody recommends this show to me, the less likely I am to remember to check it out.
Yeah, I'm like, if everybody is talking about it, I'm just like, yeah, go have fun. Like, Game of Thrones, I think I didn't give in until about season 5, and that was mostly because of dragons.
And even what I watched of Game of Thrones is just, essentially the Cliff's Notes version of the fight scenes. Like, I was just watching some of the combat scenes, and I'm like, wow, these guys are treating their swords like they are way too fucking heavy. Like, that's always been such an aggravating thing for me whenever any, sword wielding series keeps looking like the swords are weighing like they're anvils on sticks or something. No, that's not the point.
Yeah.
Like, a cutlass shouldn't weigh any more than a gallon jug of milk.
Yeah, if you can't handle the weapon, you shouldn't be holding the weapon.
Yeah, which actors aren't stunt people, and sometimes they do, but that's fine on its own. But it's just always annoying when it seems like there's a very deliberate choice in the choreography to make the swords seem way heavier than they are.
I find like sword fighting, I guess just like battle scenes in general, for me, I find incredibly difficult to write. And I can only imagine that like doing it in film would be just as hard, because that kind of like nitpicky stuff, like if you know it, then if you're reading it, you're gonna go, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. And I imagine watching is gonna be the same.
There is that aspect of it. I literally went to a whole I literally participated in a panel on how to write fight scenes before. I mean, and usually what I'll do is I'll just act them out. Like, I'll just be like, all right, look, we have 2 people. One of them's doing this, one of them's doing this. Okay, what's the counter to that? What's the counter to that? And also there's the question of, how much detail do you want to get into? Also, kind of knowing your audience. If you're going to write a fight scene for people who are fighters, then it makes sense to use the correct terminology. But if action is not, a huge part of a given story, then you can just be referring to, how the blades continue to clash.
And I find it helps, like, if your narrator doesn't know, then you can get away with, like, a myriad of things.
I wonder about, like, that style of narration. Like, the narrator is confused.
Right. I always find that that's kind of fun, because then the audience is just kind of, like, confused along with them, usually, unless they are more knowledgeable. But I find that interesting. I get hung up on those kind of details when I'm writing. Really bad.
For me, the one trap I always fall into is, like, I have to give everything a unique name. Meanwhile, how many John Smiths are there? So I had to entirely... I even had to create... I even created the version of John Smith that existed in one of the universes. Literally, this word candor, that means placeholder name until we think of a better one. Nice. And then 90% of the time they forget to.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent.
But, that's...
Well, thank you so much for sitting and talking with me.
No problem.
That was fantastic.
Thank you to Brianne, Dax, Cyan, Carl, and Mark for guiding these conversations. And thanks to Maxwell, Daniel, and Gregor for sharing their authentic selves. You've just spent a few hours with actually 5 people on the autism spectrum, our 3 guests and 2 of our hosts. How did you see autism before? How do you see it now? We hope that by sharing honestly with all of you, you have broadened your definition of what the autism community looks like. Thank you for taking this journey with us.